May I call the meeting to order? So, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It's my pleasure to welcome all participants to the second meeting of the Working Group on Treaty Universalization during the CSP8 cycle. The working group was established by the Third Conference of State Parties in 2017 to operate under its terms of reference with a mandate of leading the process of harmonizing thoughts and ideas on treaty universalization with a view to determining the best approaches for advancing the universality of the treaty. In taking forward the mandate of the working group on treaty universalization, it is critical for ATT stakeholders to exchange views on continuous basis on effective approaches to promote the universality of the treaty. In this regard, the co-chairs of this working group have prepared and circulated a draft agenda to guide discussions for today. I would like to draw your attention to the fact that there will be a slight change in the agenda. As circulated earlier, we have decided to merge the agenda items 3 and 4 into one single agenda item. Such a shortened draft agenda will cover the following items, which is first the opening of the meeting, second, the ATT Secretariat update on the status of ratification and accessions. Third, update on activities to promote the universalization of the ATT by the presidencies and the chairs. And fourth, update on efforts by states to promote the universalization of ATT. And finally, 5, civil society and industry efforts to promote the universalization of ATT. So may I take it that participants accept this draft agenda with this slight amendment just presented as the basis of our work for today? This seems to be the case, so it's so decided. Distinguished delegates, with the order of business for today confirmed, I would like to proceed to item 2 of our agenda and invite the ATT Secretariat to give us an overview presentation on the status of ATT ratifications and accessions. I would like to suggest that this presentation and my report on activities under agenda item 3 will be just taken as one block, and then we will have any interventions after that, and not immediately now after the Secretariat has presented its presentation. So with that, I would like to invite the head of the Secretariat to make his presentation. Zani, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good afternoon to distinguished delegates and ladies and gentlemen. Mr. President, I want to thank you first in your capacity as the co-chair of the Working Group on Treaty Universalization for inviting the Secretariat to participate in these discussions of this working group and provide an overview presentation on the status of participation. We have always adopted a particular practice in making these presentations to meetings of the ATT. I'm trying to bring, can I ask my colleagues to bring the presentation on? I'm unable to do so from here. There you are. It's technology failing us at the critical moment. As we do the presentation on the status of participation, we normally provide a global overview with 2 perspectives to it. The global overview as well as the regional perspective, and also look at the distribution of states parties by region, and conclude by looking at the rate at which state parties became state parties to the ATT, or states became state parties to the ATT. The first slide, as you already see, at this point in time, we have 111 states parties. We are happy to have reached this mark, and You recall that at the beginning of this week, there was an indication that the Philippines had become a state party in March, and they become state party number 111. So we are happy to have reached this mark. However, then we still have signatory states who have signed the ATT but are yet to ratify it. And the total number of signatory states are 30 at the present moment. And out of that, if you look at the UN member states, they are still out of the 193 UN member states, 54 who are not yet associated with the ATT. So they still sit outside of the ATT process. And probably these are the states that we have to try to double our efforts to try to get on board. On the right of the slide, there is a pie chart which tries to look at the membership of the ATT, looking at the categories of states, green being states parties and red or orange are states that have signed the ATT but have not yet ratified it, and the red are those who are remaining outside. But we're happy then to present that 57% of UN member states are currently states parties to the ATT, with 15% of UN member states being signatory states. And then, of course, then we have the 28% which remains outside of the ATT. The next slide then looks at the distribution of states by region. In this slide, we are relying then on the UN statistics division numbers, because it gives us a better view of the spread of states across the globe. What you do see then on this is that in terms of regions, the states or the regions with the most states parties is Europe. As you can see, 91% of states in Europe are state parties to the ATT. And that is followed by the Americas, who are currently standing at 79%. And the third in line is Africa as a region. 52% of states in that region are states parties to the ATT. And of course, then we've got Oceania at number 4, and number 5 is Asia. I've just indicated already that there is a change that has happened in the last month, and we are happy that there has been an increase in the number of states parties there, from 21% in February to the current number, 23%. That's an improvement of 2%, but we still have a long way to go. And I think these are some of the discussions that this working group must have. The next slide then looks at the participation of states. Basically, the rate at which states became state parties. Maybe here, as an introduction, I need to indicate, therefore, that the baseline for this is, you recall that the ATT was adopted by the General Assembly in April 2013, and it opened for signature on the 3rd of June 2013. It came into force in December 2014. And if you take then June as a baseline, you will therefore realize that there's quite a number of states that became states parties at the beginning of this process. Taking as an example, the first year, which was June 2013 to June 2014, which is the first year, 32 states became states parties. The following year was 37, 16 in the third year, and the numbers then started to go down. Then in year number 4, there were 7 states parties, and then it evened out at 4 states parties for the next 2 years. And we are happy then to welcome at this point the Philippines as the state that has become a state party in the last year, and we are hopeful that there will be more others who are joining the Philippines in that block. And the last slide is just a detail of the rate at which states became state parties. I think this you can be able to read on the presentation that we'll publish on the ATT website, but this is just detail about, if you look at it from a regional perspective, at what point states became state parties. Mr. President, I will not go down to these different colors that we see over here. Safe to say, this is just detailed information that delegates can consider at their own time in terms of how states became state parties per region. Thank you so much, Mr. President. I hand over to you.
I would like to thank the head of the ATT Secretariat for this overview presentation, and would like to join the head of the Secretariat in once again welcoming the Philippines to the ATT. We've just heard it's 2%. No, it's 100% membership, and very welcome to the ATT family. That's a very good news, and we are looking forward to work on this region now jointly with you. Distinguished delegates, as I suggested at this stage, I would like to proceed directly to agenda item 3 and update the meeting on activities undertaken by the CSP8 presidency in promoting the universalization of the treaty since assuming office immediately after CSP8. I can assure you, though, there will be room for any intervention on one or both of the agenda items just covered right afterwards. Since coming into office, the German presidency has undertaken a range of activities related to treaty universalization. We reported a number of these activities during the February meeting, and I will not repeat this here. Just let me recall briefly the facts. We successfully passed the ATT resolution in the first committee and the General Assembly. And we have been engaging with 17 states in a round of démarches organized and coordinated in Berlin by the head of the Export Control Branch and supported by other states, parties, and the European Union. And we are very grateful for this joint endeavor. Based on the answers received, we are currently working on a follow-up with regard to those states which might, or as we see it, most close to an accession in the very near future. So on Monday this week, we invited 7 delegations for a round of discussions. I think we had a very good exchange on some of the most pressing questions and addressed possible ways to support the internal processes in the respective countries. And I'm very hopeful that also given the very positive example of the Philippines and the accession of the Philippines, I sincerely hope that we were able to add momentum towards further accession to our treaty, and we will certainly continue with our efforts in this regard. So this reflects the status of our efforts at this state of play. So distinguished delegates, please allow me to also share some initial thoughts on the future work of universalization of the ATT. As you are well aware, until today, this working group had always two members, the previous presidency and the current one. And each presidency was able and is able to choose the respective focus on universalization efforts. However, what we did not foresee was a medium or even long-term plan to follow in our efforts. This may have been based on the fact that there is no supporting body to keep track of all the efforts. But I think we have to keep in mind, and also the Philippines are an example, that we are talking of processes that may require a considerable amount of time, well beyond a single CSP presidency. A ratification process, the accession to the treaty is a long process which goes well beyond 1 year, 2 year, or even more. So the question is, how shall we ensure a continuous support? That is just to share with you that we have started an internal brainstorming on this. We are still not in a position to answer this. We are even perhaps far away from having a concrete answer. But I wanted to use this opportunity to shed a light on this issue, and I can assure you that we will continue working on this issue, on this question, and I'm quite hopeful that we will be able to come back with more in the course of the upcoming CSP8 meeting. So with this, I would end this presentation, and so the question is, would any delegation like to take the floor at this time? The floor is open. Who is this? We have. I cannot see that.
I think it's
Malawi, okay. Okay. So please, I see the delegate from Malawi. Please, you have the floor, sir.
Thanks so much, Mr. President, for giving us the floor. Fellow distinguished delegates, good afternoon. Firstly, I would like to echo the sentiments made by other delegates that the presentations made in the side events have been so enriching, and they outlined contextual and contemporary challenges, the combating of illicit trade of conventional arms and the possible solutions. We also would like to applaud the approach by all working groups that of incorporating the best practices of states parties in their respective areas of jurisdiction, including that of regional organizations. This will ensure that the product that will come out would address the root causes of diversion practically. At this juncture, allow us to congratulate Philippines for joining the ATT family, which is a motivation to us who are yet to join. We are glad to inform the delegates that Malawi has started the process of ratifying the ATT, and we hope to complete this process very soon. Needless to say, the effective combating of illicit trade of conventional arms and the untold miseries that come with it can only be effective if all states parties can join together in observing the spirit and the letter of the treaty. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished delegate from Malawi, and is there any other delegation? Okay. I'm a little bit short-sighted, but I see the lady. Please, you have the floor. Could you please tell us from which delegation you come?
Good afternoon, all. My name is Yvonne Hill from Sierra Leone.
Okay.
So thank you very much, Mr. President, for giving me the floor. First, my delegation would like to acknowledge the important work undertaken by the working group on treaty universalization. And thank you and thank Ambassador Lansana Berry of Sierra Leone, co-chairs of CSP8 Circle, for the important work you are carrying out to promote universal adherence to the Arms Trade Treaty. We firmly believe a widely endorsed and implemented ATT has the potential to evolve into one of the most important normative initiatives supporting global efforts to prevent the illicit trade in conventional arms. Often, weapons legally acquired by states end up being used by forces they were not meant for. Illicit transfers and diversions from official stockpiles have become significant in conventional arms regulation in many countries in Africa and elsewhere. Many countries in Africa have suffered devastating loss of life and heinous injuries on a vast scale, all as a result of the inadequate regulation of international arms export. In this context, the importance of universalization cannot be overstated. Universal adherence to the ATT would positively contribute to responsible arms transfer by promoting transparency and accountability in the global arms trade, as well as to global peace and security, and create better conditions for sustainable development. We congratulate and welcome the Philippines for depositing its instrument of ratification and becoming the 111th state party to the treaty. We also recall with great interest the announcement made by the Gambia to accede to the ATT as the last ECOWAS member state of the opening session of the CSP7. We encourage the Gambia to finalize the necessary processes to seek approval for accession and to join the treaty by CSP8. This end, we call on all implementing partners, including the Voluntary Trust Fund, to facilitate the required resources and technical expertise to ensure the Gambia's timely accession. While great progress has been made, a lot remains to be done to realize the full universalization of the treaty. We strongly believe a safe, responsible, and transparent global arms trade is necessary for our security and for the security and well-being of all states. As such, we call on states to sign and ratify the treaty. Sierra Leone remains firmly committed to promoting universalization of the treaty and welcome the effort made by fellow state parties. Intergovernmentalization, organizations, civil society, and industry to continue to promote the universalization of this treaty as a priority. Thank you very much for your attention.
I thank the distinguished delegate from Sierra Leone for her intervention. And next on my list is the Philippines. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and to the whole body for welcoming us. And we would like to assure your presidency of our full support on your efforts leading up to the 8th Conference of the States Parties. We appreciate the fact that there is an understanding that the process of accession or ratification is a long and arduous process, and we look forward to sharing what we have experienced with other states who are also in the process of ratifying the ATT. We thank you for your attention.
I thank the distinguished delegate from the Philippines. And the next speaker on my list is Gambia. Please, Gambia, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, Excellencies. The Gambia wish to congratulate our President and to convey our support to your leadership. We also wish to take the opportunity to thank His Excellency Ambassador Lassana Gabriel of Sierra Leone for the brilliant leadership that he shepherded this organization during his tenure, and for the enormous support that he and his delegation provided for the Gambia to be part of this very important community. We align ourselves with the earlier expressions of our colleague from Sierra Leone and to reiterate our commitment to complete the remaining items for our full accession and membership to this body. We look forward to the opportunity for all the necessary support, technical, to be able to finalize the remaining elements. As you know, as a small states, capacity and competence is a challenge. So to accelerate the process, we will appreciate the Secretariat's efforts to help us finalize the remaining items. We thank you, Your Excellency, and be assured of our continuing support of your work and of your leadership. Thank you very much.
Thank the distinguished delegate of Gambia, and also for the kind words addressed to the chair, and for this encouraging statement. We are all here and wait for Gambia to become a member of our family. So thank you very much. Next speaker on my list is the State of Palestine. So please, the State of Palestine, you have the floor. Please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. The State of Palestine congratulates you once again on your designation as the President of the 8th Conference of the States Parties of the Arms Trade Treaty and expresses its appreciation to you for leading our efforts in a transparent and effective manner. We would also like to take this opportunity to thank the working group co-chairs for all their excellent work to promote universalization of the treaty, among other important stakeholders, including civil society. At the outset, we would also like to welcome the Philippines and congratulate them for joining the treaty. Mr. President, the State of Palestine supports all outreach activities to promote the universalization of the ATT, which have led to a progressive growth in the number of states to 111 state parties. However, the State of Palestine recalls its concern that a number of major arms exporters and importers are not yet party to the treaty and calls upon them to do so, as responsible arms transfers represents a humanitarian imperative and is an essential step towards maintaining international peace and security. It is important to note that even if a state is party neither to the ATT nor to a regional arms transfer instrument, its arms transfers do not take place in a legal vacuum. At a minimum, states have obligations to respect and ensure respect for IHL in all circumstances. In this regard, we believe that outreach activities should highlight the fact that the ATT provisions reflect universal norms that already exist both in international treaties and in customary international law. The faithful implementation of those instruments should be reflected by acceding to the ATT. Mr. President, universalization means both expanding the number of states parties and ensuring that they live up to their obligations. It must be stressed that even the best universalization efforts will be of little use if states parties do not have the political will and conviction to ensure that the core principles of the treaty, including Article 6, alongside the treaty's other operative provisions, are implemented faithfully in spirit and to the letter. In this regard, states that are party to the ATT must act as role models by putting an end to irresponsible trade of conventional arms that undermine international peace and security and facilitate commission of egregious crimes and threaten the international legal order. As we mentioned previously, arms control and disarmament education is an important tool to advance the universalization of the treaty, and the media has a crucial role to play in promoting a favorable public opinion towards the ATT's humanitarian purpose. Therefore, the State of Palestine supports considering new areas of activities towards universalization, including utilizing media and education to promote the treaty. Moreover, parliamentarians worldwide also have a crucial role to play in universalization of the treaty. As elected representatives, and once equipped with the necessary knowledge, they can advance universalization activities within their constituencies and within their respective countries. In closing, Mr. President, we stand ready to engage with other countries towards successful implementation and universalization of the ATT. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished delegate in the State of Palestine for her intervention. And this concludes my list of speakers. Is there any delegation would like to take the floor at this stage? Yes, please. I see Argentina. Please, sir, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente, por sus esfuerzos realizados en pos de la universalización del tratado. La Argentina ratifica su compromiso con este grupo de trabajo, el cual copresidió en la 6ª y 7ª Conferencia de Estados Parte. Y en este sentido quisiera reiterar su pleno apoyo y cooperación a las actividades de difusión realizadas por la copresidencia. Aprovechamos asimismo la oportunidad para felicitar a Filipinas por su reciente incorporación al tratado. Mi delegación sostiene que la universalización es una de las herramientas más efectivas para lograr la aplicación del tratado. En este sentido, creemos que los esfuerzos deben estar concentrados mayormente en realizar actividades de difusión en aquellos países que constituyen los mayores exportadores e importadores de armas, atento a que a ellos les cabe una mayor responsabilidad a la hora de prevenir y erradicar el desvío. Asimismo, quisiéramos destacar la importancia de promover el tratado en foros afines, especialmente en organizaciones regionales. Por ejemplo, quisiéramos recordar la intervención de Argentina en la 2ª conferencia de la Convención Interamericana sobre Transparencia en Adquisición de Armas Convencionales, CITAC, que tuvo lugar el pasado 19 de abril, luego de varios años de inactividad, y donde se hizo referencia a la sinergia entre ambos instrumentos. Saludamos asimismo la presencia de ATT a través de una representante en uno de los paneles de ese evento. Por otra parte, consideramos que el examen periódico universal del Consejo de Derechos Humanos constituye otra valiosa oportunidad para que los Estados parte de ATT realicen un llamamiento a aquellos Estados que aún no son parte para que puedan adherir. Máximo teniendo en cuenta el nexo entre ATT y el derecho internacional de derechos humanos. En ese sentido, mi delegación ha realizado llamamientos en el último examen periódico universal a varios países que estaban atravesando el proceso de revisión para que firmen o ratifiquen el tratado. Alentamos a otros estados de ATT a sumarse a esos esfuerzos. Por último, instamos a los países que están participando en esta reunión, pero que aún no han firmado o ratificado el tratado, a lo que lo hagan a la brevedad, haciendo uso de las posibilidades de cooperación y asistencia que el instrumento y la presidencia les brinda. Y adelantamos nuestro apoyo para colaborar también en esa tarea. Muchas gracias.
I thank the distinguished delegate Argentine. And next speaker on my list is Japan. Please, Japan, you have the floor. Oh, I just see Japan is online? Online. Okay, so we will have an online intervention by Japan.
Okay. Mr. President, At the outset, let me congratulate the Philippines for their ratification of the ATT in March this year. Japan warmly welcomed the Philippines as a new state party from the Asian Pacific region and as the first ASEAN member state to join the treaty. We are also pleased to hear the progress made by the government of Gambia to join the ATT and are looking forward to its early accession to the treaty. Japan would like to express its gratitude to Ambassador Goebel and Ambassador Ghibli for your efforts as a co-chair of the working group on treaty universalization. Japan shares the priority of the German presidency on universalization in the Asian Pacific region and appreciates its focused approach. In order to achieve our shared goal of establishing the highest possible common international standards for regulating conventional arms trade and promoting transparency and responsible actions by state parties, we need to redouble our efforts toward further universalization. Japan continues to play a role in universalization in encouraging non-state parties by using the opportunities of bilateral dialogue on disarmament and arms control issues. We have also co-hosted the Universalization Roundtable for Asian Pacific region with Australia, New Zealand, and Control Arms annually, which underlines and discusses the benefits and specific challenges of joining the treaty. Lastly, Japan calls on all state parties, including signatory states, to accede to and ratify the treaty without further delay. Japan is committed to increasing our collective efforts. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished delegate from Japan for our intervention. And next on my list is Peru. So please, Peru, lady, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. En primer lugar, mi delegación desea felicitarlo por los esfuerzos que viene desarrollando para lograr una mayor adhesión de estados al Tratado sobre Comercio de Armas. Asimismo, deseamos expresarle la colaboración y el apoyo del Perú para avanzar en la promoción de la universalización del tratado. Cuente con mi delegación, cuente con mi país. Nosotros el año pasado realizamos gestiones con un país amigo de la región de América Latina y el Caribe y estamos apoyando para que pueda este país adherirse al tratado. Estamos convencidos, señor presidente, que la mejor forma de promover su universalización y elevar el nivel de ratificaciones es demostrando que el tratado es íntegramente funcional y que está obteniendo resultados significativos en la reducción de la violencia armada, el sufrimiento humano y el impacto negativo que tiene en nuestros países. Es en ese marco que saludamos la adhesión de Filipinas y hacemos un llamado para que otros estados puedan adherirse al tratado y en particular de aquellos estados fabricantes o exportadores de armas. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
I thank the distinguished delegate from Peru for her intervention. And next speaker on my list is Ireland. Please, Ireland, you have the floor.
Thank you for giving me the floor. Ireland thanks the Presidency and Vice Presidents for their activities to promote the universalization of the ATT and the Secretariat for the update on the status of ratifications and accessions. We very much welcome last month's ratification by the Philippines as the ATT's 111th state party and as the first ASEAN country to ratify or accede to the treaty. We hope that this good news will help spur more progress towards universalization in the region and elsewhere. We also thank the Gambia for their update and we look forward to welcoming them to this body. The Philippines' ratification comes after an almost 2-year lull in ratification and accession. This is expected as a multilateral treaty matures, but it means that we must redouble our collective efforts in international cooperation and outreach to continue to raise awareness and build capacity. We should make the most of available tools such as the sponsorship program and the voluntary trust fund. Civil society and the industry also play an important role in promoting universalization. I would like to reiterate that universalization must be accompanied by effective treaty implementation. International standards are strongest and most effective when they are universally applied. The ATT is a crucial part of a comprehensive international regime that, when fully universalized and implemented, will support peace, stability, security, and development. I also wanted to just react to a suggestion made by the State of Palestine earlier about promoting the role of media and education in raising awareness of the humanitarian goals of the ATT. We think it's a great idea that can perhaps be explored within the remit of the Working Group on Treaty Universalization and perhaps of future presidencies as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the distinguished delegate from Ireland for this intervention. And next on my list is Mexico. Please, Mexico, you have the floor.
Sí, gracias, señor presidente. Reconocemos y agradecemos sus esfuerzos llevados a cabo como copresidente del Grupo de Trabajo sobre Universalización, con miras a una mayor adhesión al ATT. Para México, el llamado a la universalización y a la instrumentación del ATT se mantiene vigente, pues hasta el día de hoy continúan incrementándose las muertes y las víctimas de violencia por causa de las armas pequeñas y ligeras en las manos equivocadas, en usuarios no autorizados en todas las regiones del mundo. Solo mediante controles más eficaces al comercio de armas y la acción conjunta para prevenir el desvío y el tráfico ilícito de armas se podrán corregir estas tendencias negativas. México continuará apoyando los acercamientos entre secretariados y órganos de gobierno de los foros y mecanismos que desde diferentes ángulos pueden contribuir a la prevención del tráfico de armas, así como a la creación de sinergias en busca de la complementariedad y la coherencia entre los distintos regímenes de control. Bajo esta lógica, México seguirá promoviendo y apoyando la participación de la sociedad civil y la academia en favor de la universalidad del tratado y en cumplimiento de la meta 16.4 de los Objetivos de Desarrollo. Por supuesto, también damos la más cálida bienvenida a Filipinas como miembro del ATT. Este es un muy importante acontecimiento en la vida del tratado y estamos seguros que su participación traerá importantes visiones y experiencias desde su contexto nacional y regional. Gracias.
I thank the distinguished delegate from Mexico. And next speaker on my list is Control Arms, please. Control Arms, you have the floor.
Greetings of peace, and thank you, Mr. Chair. The universalization of the Arms Trade Treaty, along with its effective implementation, are essential to addressing the diversion of and the illicit and irresponsible trade in arms that will ultimately reduce human suffering. We take this opportunity to congratulate my country, the Philippines, for its leadership in becoming the first ASEAN state to join the treaty. We hope that the Philippine ratification can serve as a good example for the other 4 ASEAN members that have signed the treaty but have not yet ratified, namely Cambodia, Malaysia, Singapore, and Thailand. Control Arms and its members and partners in Southeast Asia look forward to working with the Philippine government in implementing the ATT. Earlier this year, the Control Arms Coalition undertook consultations with its members in the Asia-Pacific, Africa, Latin American, and Caribbean regions on how best to support universalization. These consultations enabled us to better understand the political and practical challenges to ATT universalization and to identify non-state parties likely to join the ATT in the coming years. Similarly, in November 2021, Control Arms hosted an online meeting with government officials and civil society representatives from the Middle East and North Africa, the region with the lowest universalization rates. The feedback received through the consultation will form the basis for the Control Arms universalization strategy. We look forward to working closely with the Working Group on Treaty Universalization co-chairs towards supporting states who wish to join the treaty. This week on Tuesday morning, Control Arms organized an online discussion titled Advancing Universalization of the ATT in Africa. The event discussed opportunities and challenges for treaty universalization in Africa and using Cameroon's ratification process as a case study. It highlighted the benefits of the ATT for countries in this region and the role of the International Committee of the Red Cross and civil society in supporting governments in their universalization efforts. Control Arms wishes to express its appreciation provided by Gambia and Malawi on their progress towards joining the ATT. We look forward to welcoming these two countries as ATT state parties in the near future. A recurring point in both consultation and side event this week is the need for tailored outreach and assistance for those states which have not yet joined the ATT. With the support of Germany, Control Arms is working on an ATT Regional Actors Project, which mapped the work of regional and sub-regional organizations in support of the ATT universalization and implementation. The project also seeks to highlight linkages between the ATT and regional arms control instruments, programs, and activities, and identify concrete ways in which existing regional programs, for instance on data collections or stockpile management, may be channeled towards strengthening the implementation of the ATT. Preliminary findings show that regional actors are uniquely positioned to coordinate and encourage the treaty's universalization, but often their efforts are unnoticed at the international level. Control Arms would like to recommend that the Working Group on Treaty Universalization chairs consider the possibility of inviting representatives of regional organizations beyond the UN regional centers to present their work in support of the ATT. This will facilitate not only a better understanding of the work being undertaken in different regions, but also of the linkages that exist between the ATT and regional and sub-regional agreements and instruments. Thank you for your kind attention.
I thank Control Arms for this statement, and this concludes my list of speakers. Is there any delegation who would like to take the floor now? Yes, I see Mauritania. Please, Mauritania, you have the floor.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président. Bonjour à l'ensemble des participants. De prime abord, je voudrais remercier et féliciter Monsieur le Président et Monsieur le Secrétaire Général pour l'organisation et la conduite de cet important événement qui est là pour l'intérêt général de toute l'humanité. Monsieur le Président, le monde aujourd'hui fait face à un phénomène qui vient exacerber la circulation des armes dans le monde. Ce phénomène, c'est celui des armes fantômes, ou appelées fantômes, qui sont fabriquées à la maison ou au bureau à partir d'une imprimante 3D. Ce phénomène doit nous inquiéter. Ce phénomène doit nous inquiéter pour plusieurs raisons. La première raison, c'est que la fabrication de ces armes se fait rapidement et à un coût pas du tout élevé. Il doit nous inquiéter encore davantage parce que ces armes n'ont pas de numéro de série et par conséquent, pas de traçabilité. Il doit nous inquiéter parce que ça peut se retrouver facilement entre les mains de n'importe qui. Et par conséquent, je demande à ce que ce point soit analysé ou revu ou vu tout simplement et actualisé à partir du traité. Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
Je remercie la Mauritanie pour cette intervention. And next speaker on my list is China, please. China, you have the floor.
谢谢主席先生。首先呢，我想和其他同事一道欢迎菲律宾加入 ATT 大家庭。也感谢冈比亚同事对本国入约工作做的最新的更新。中方呢一直支持加强条约的普遍性。很高兴看到条约的宗旨和目标正得到越来越多国家的认同。ATT 缔约国的数量也已经达到了111个，条约普遍性不断提升。中方相信，这得益于主席 ATT 秘书处普遍性问题工作组以及所有各方的不懈努力。同时，中方也注意到一些重要的武器贸易国，包括最大的常规武器出口国，仍然没有加入 ATT 条约。中方呼吁相关国家尽快加入条约。同时，考虑到很多国家，特别是发展中国家面临的现实困难，中方呼吁有能力的国家继续加强国际合作与援助，开展能力建设，加大资金和技术支持。中方相信，这将有助于吸引更多国家加入条约，并提升整体的履约水平。谢谢主席先生。
I thank the distinguished delegate from China for his intervention. And next speaker on my list is Isabella. Lisa. Yes. So it's Acer, please. Please, sir, you have the floor. They are online. I've just heard that they are online, so please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le Président, Mesdames et Messieurs les délégués, Monsieur le Président, nous tenons à vous féliciter pour la tenue de ce travail préparatif à ce comité, ainsi que le secrétariat pour son excellente présentation. Celle-ci révèle bien l'immense tâche, après presque 8 années d'entrée en vigueur du TCA, qui se présente aux États et aux sociétés civiles engagées dans l'universalisation du TCA. Cette présentation nous montre que la récente ratification de pays aussi importants que la Chine et les Philippines sauve une configuration qui aurait pu apparaître comme singulièrement occidentalo-centrée. Monsieur le Président, le meilleur argument pour rassurer et rallier les États jusqu'à maintenant sceptiques est encore de montrer dans la praxis que l'engagement des États parties l'est sur la non-discrimination de sa mise en œuvre, particulièrement les articles 6 et 7. Or, les guerres en Ukraine, en République démocratique du Congo, en Éthiopie, en Libye, au Yémen le montrent. Nous en sommes encore loin lorsque des décisions sur ces articles, comme mentionné par la délégation de Palestine, sont interprétées de manière antinomique par les principaux producteurs d'armes partis au TCA, tels que la Grande-Bretagne et la France. Les États partis doivent maintenant incarner leurs engagements au regard du TCA et leurs engagements internationaux pertinents, particulièrement sur les droits de l'homme et le droit international humanitaire. Et peut-être alors serons-nous entendus par des pays aussi différents que l'Arabie saoudite, Cuba, l'Éthiopie, les Émirats arabes unis, l'Inde, l'Iran, Israël, le Pakistan, le Qatar, la Russie et le Venezuela. Merci pour votre attention.
Je remercie Essa pour cette intervention. And the next speaker on my list is Nigeria. Please, Nigeria, you have the floor.
Thank you for giving Nigeria the floor, Mr. President. As this is the first time a delegation takes the floor, let me firstly congratulate you on your presidency and also thank all the coordinators of the respective working groups of the ATT for all their efforts throughout deliberations. As we continue to trudge towards successful outcomes in the ATT, my delegation wishes to assure you of its continuous support. Mr. President, in the context of the universalization of the treaty, my delegation would like to underscore that the overall success of the ATT is predicated on global accession to the treaty by states who are yet to become parties. As a state which is a major recipient of the negative impact of arms diversions and illicit arms trade, the universalization of the treaty would provide the necessary impetus and capacity required to curb the negative effects of arms trade and diversion in Nigeria, and most importantly, the West African region. The humanitarian consequences of illicit arms trade and diversions remain a major concern for my delegation. In this regard, my delegation wishes to call on all member states who are yet to accede to the treaty to do so, with a view to facilitate the required global cooperation to end the menace of illicit arms trade and diversion. The full implementation of the treaty's universalization would indeed stimulate global peace and stability. In concluding, I wish to reiterate my delegation's support for constructive dialogue towards concrete outcomes in the context of the universalization of the treaty. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished delegate from Nigeria for his intervention. And with a view to the clock, I would ask all delegations to be as brief as possible. It's my understanding that we perhaps exhausted to a large extent already the agenda items 4 and 5. Next speaker on my list is the Global Coalition for Limitation of Armaments. Please, you have the floor. It is online? It's in the room. Okay, please, you have the floor.
Thank you for giving me the floor, Mr. President. The Global Coalition for Limitation of Armaments would firstly like to thank you and the co-chair for your efforts and all the participants for their commitment and views. Certain regions of the world, such as Asia, have a significantly smaller percentage of the ATT membership. It is imperative to focus and engage in dialogue with these regions as unregulated arms trade and transfer come with challenges such as increased violence and conflicts. To enhance their participation, we need to put civil society's collaboration with relevant stakeholders at the forefront. Voluntary Trust Fund and the ATT's Secretariat Sponsorship Program are tools that can help push for broader ratification. Even though only states are eligible for VTF funding, civil societies can act as implementing partners. This is where we believe there's an open door for us to collaborate with states for adaptation and effective implementation of this treaty. We appreciate the expansion of the VTF eligibility to states that are not yet signatories to the treaty. At this juncture, we would like to throw light on Article 23 of the ATT, which allows for provisional application of the treaty's core articles that are Articles 6 and 7. Numerous states have adopted this practice, and a campaign to promote non-parties for the same can act as a pre-step towards ratification. We support Control Arms' view that it can be effective to adopt a tailored and targeted focus on sub-regions with low participation, and the State of Palestine's view of disseminating ATT knowledge through media. The UN Trust Facility supporting cooperation on arms regulation funding projects are open to regional organizations and NGOs. Such programs can be offered to organizations and civil societies working in regions of low treaty ratification. We would like to draw attention to the linguistic barriers influencing universalization. We support South Korea's 2019 proposal on the translation of ATT into local languages and a database to access such translations. The reason being that the 6 official UN languages, with an exception to Chinese, are not widely spoken across Asia, a region with fewer state parties. Furthermore, the publication of a model national law in multiple languages can assist other states to adopt the treaty in their domestic laws and fulfill their obligations. We want to share that we are currently communicating with the Special Rapporteur on private security and military partnerships to promote the agreement and the discussions that will take place in May. Additionally, we are hosting a side event on the outcomes of the meeting to discuss with organizations and active parties about transfer and the importance of strengthening the treaty. We also intend to send a proposal to the General Secretariat for their support in training workshops, which will be held in cooperation with the national bodies and number of universities to promote and disseminate the treaty. Lastly, we would like to call for civil society's enhanced participation and collaboration with the relevant stakeholders. This can be done through informal consultations, outreach programs with a rotating regional focus on universalization. I thank you.
I thank the Global Coalition for Limitation of Armaments for this intervention. And last speaker on my list is Panama. Please, Panama, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Agradecemos a los copresidentes del Grupo de Trabajo sobre Universalización del Tratado, Alemania y Sierra Leona, por su dedicación y esfuerzos para aumentar el número de Estados partes en el Tratado sobre el Comercio de Armas. Teniendo en cuenta la limitación del tiempo, voy a reducir en 30 segundos el mensaje principal. Primero, darle la bienvenida a Filipinas como Estado parte del tratado, apoyar la propuesta realizada por el Estado de Palestina de trabajar más con los medios de comunicación y educación como una medida para promocionar la universalización y compartir algunas tareas que Panamá ha realizado. Panamá contribuye con la meta de universalización a través del mecanismo del examen periódico universal del Consejo de Derechos Humanos. Y en el último año hemos recomendado a Somalia, Timor-Leste y Venezuela para que valoren positivamente ratificar el tratado. Y me complace informar que Somalia dio una respuesta positiva en cuanto a esta recomendación y en los próximos meses tendremos información sobre la posición de Timor-Leste y Venezuela. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
I thank the distinguished delegate from Panama, and Fanny, I have the EU on my list. Please, the European Union, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador. The EU would like to thank you, Mr. President, Ambassador Thomas Goebel of Germany, as well as Ambassador Lansana Nagberi of Sierra Leone, for your continued outreach, démarches, and letters aimed at increasing the number of states parties to the ATT. The EU warmly welcomes the Philippines as the 111th state party. We are pleased to have been able to play a role in preparing the Philippines for its accession to the treaty through our ATT outreach projects as implemented by German Export Control Authority, BAFA, and by Expertise France from France. The EU hopes that Gambia will soon follow and accede to the treaty as well. The EU calls on all states parties to continue the collective engagement and outreach efforts to states not parties to the treaty, underlining the benefits of joining the ATT, thus contributing to international and regional peace and stability. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you very much to you for this statement. This concludes now my list of speakers for this agenda item. However, as I indicated, and also with a view to the clock, it's my understanding that we have widely already exhausted the agenda items 4 and 5, which is the efforts of states and of civil society and industry in promoting the universalization of the treaty. However, I will take this agenda items up. So we will move then to agenda item 4. Is there any delegation who would like to take the floor under this agenda item? which is update of states on their efforts. This seems not to be the case. So then I would proceed to item 5, the last agenda item, which is the update on civil society and industry on their efforts promoting the universalization. Any delegation who wants to take the floor? Yes, please, I can see. Please, lady, you have the floor.
Hi, Mr. President. In Malaysia, I'm actually taking the floor for states' efforts on universalization. So, okay, thank you, Mr. President. As this is my first time my delegation is taking the floor for this meeting, I would like to thank Mr. President and the Secretariat for organizing this important international work. Malaysia commends all efforts undertaken by the German presidency, all chairs and facilitators in preparing for the upcoming 8th Conference of State Parties. And Malaysia welcomes the approach taken by the President in prioritizing the universalization efforts of the Arms Treaty. Mr. President, Malaysia attaches great importance to the work of the treaty and considers this treaty as an important instrument to regulate the international trade of conventional weapons with the aim to prevent and eradicate the illicit trade and diversion of conventional weapons. Malaysia believes the treaty is capable to play a vital role in strengthening states' domestic legislation relating to the international transfer of conventional weapons, and effective implementation of this treaty would contribute to international and regional peace, security, and stability. Malaysia wishes to take this opportunity to congratulate the Philippines, our ASEAN member state, for successfully ratifying the treaty in March this year, and we look forward to learning from their experience and their implementation plans of the ATT. On our part, Malaysia remains committed to ratify the treaty and is actively working with all national stakeholders in intensifying our efforts towards this goal. Malaysia also remains steadfast in our endeavor to ensure that our domestic legislation and procedures are in place in order to be in full compliance with all obligations under the treaty. Even though Malaysia has yet to become a state party to the ATT, Malaysia has always been consistent to subscribe to the treaty provisions. Malaysia has domestic legislation and in place that govern the importation, exportation, transit, transshipment, and brokering of conventional weapons such as Strategic Trade Act, the Arms Act, and the Explosive Acts. These legislations serve as the backbone of our arms control system in Malaysia. In addition, Malaysia has continuously participated in several trainings and workshops organized by various organizations. Recently, Malaysia participated in the EU ATT Outreach Program 3 ASEAN Kickoff Seminar, a sub-regional online workshop for Southeast Asia on 20th April 2022. And this program provides an opportunity for participating states to exchange views and ideas on ATT, review outcomes of the second EU ATT project, and discuss the current status of ATT implementation in the ASEAN region. Malaysia wishes to express our appreciation to the EU and all CSOs for the support in promoting ATT and for sharing information on ATT implementation. Malaysia looks forward to participating in future programs on ATT. Malaysia also supports your idea, Mr. President, to explore medium and long-term plans to pursue universalization activities of the ATT. Malaysia believes it is crucial for the plans to include measures to address challenges faced by states in ratifying or acceding to the treaty. Exchange of experience and views with arms exporter and importer state as well as transit states are vital in order to establish a sustainable, comprehensive and effective medium and long-term universalization plan. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I thank the distinguished delegate from Malaysia for intervention, and I would urge all delegations that we have to close this debate. We have already taken up to 10 minutes to the next working group, and apologize to the coordinators of the working group for transparency and reporting. It's my understanding is that we have with this exhausted the interventions regarding the agenda items 4 and 5, and this would bring us to the end of the meeting. So I don't see any demands for the floor at this stage. Thank you very much for your comprehension, and thank you very much for this rich debate and rich exchange, which I think was very helpful. With this, we have reached then the end of our meeting, and I just wanted to take the opportunity also to thank my co-chair, Ambassador Gabri, who wasn't able to be with us today, for his continued cooperation, and as I said, for this active participation of all delegations. As we see, I think universalization is a task which is really for all of us, and for each single member state. And as far as Germany as a presidency is concerned, I can assure you that we will continue with our efforts in this regard. So thank you very much. And with this, I would close the meeting. This meeting is adjourned.
Start slowly and then.
Excelencias, distinguidos delegados, damas y caballeros, en nombre de las copresidentas le damos una cordial bienvenida a esta segunda reunión del Grupo de Trabajo sobre Transparencia y Presentación de Informes del TCA. También nos gustaría expresar nuestro agradecimiento al presidente de la 8ª Conferencia de Estados Partes por organizar esta segunda ronda de reuniones y a la Secretaría del TCA por su apoyo indispensable en este contexto. Las copresidentas, con el apoyo técnico de la Secretaría del TCA, preparamos 2 documentos. El primero, el proyecto de programa anotado, el cual contiene 2 anexos. La propuesta de actualización del documento de orientación tipo Preguntas Frecuentes sobre la obligación de presentar informes anuales y proyecto de propuesta de mandato del Grupo de Trabajo para el periodo comprendido entre septiembre de 2022 y agosto de 2023. Y el segundo es el informe de la reunión del Grupo de Trabajo que se celebró el 17 de febrero de 2022. Ambos documentos fueron circulados por la Secretaría del TCA el miércoles 13 de abril de 2022 y se encuentran disponibles en el sitio web del TCA en todos los idiomas oficiales. Antes de proceder con nuestra labor sustantiva, nos gustaría abordar algunas cuestiones administrativas. Como habrán notado, en el programa de esta semana, el grupo de trabajo deberá completar su trabajo en 2 horas. En vista del reducido tiempo asignado a esta reunión debido al formato híbrido, alentaremos a las delegaciones a hacer declaraciones breves y concretas. Abriremos la reunión con la adopción de la agenda. Las copresidentas quisieran recordarles a los participantes que durante la 7ª Conferencia de Estados Partes, los Estados Partes endosaron un número de temas permanentes de la agenda y tareas recurrentes y específicas para el grupo de trabajo en el periodo comprendido entre la 7ª y 8ª Conferencia de Estados Partes. Pueden ver la agenda en pantalla. Las copresidentas quisieran preguntarles a los participantes si tienen algún comentario sobre el proyecto de agenda anotada o si desean proponer algún tema de agenda adicional bajo otras cuestiones. Si no hay solicitudes de uso de la palabra, las copresidentas concluyen que la agenda está adoptada. Abordaremos los temas de la agenda en el orden indicado y aguardamos con interés un diálogo abierto, constructivo e interactivo durante la reunión. Con esto pasamos al primer tema de la agenda, situación actual del cumplimiento de las obligaciones de presentación de informes. En cada reunión, el grupo de trabajo examina el estado de la presentación de informes. Con este fin, la Secretaría del TCA hará una presentación con un panorama general de la situación actual de la presentación de informes y del progreso alcanzado desde nuestra última reunión en febrero de 2022. Sin más preámbulos, le cedo la palabra a la señora Sarah Parker de la Secretaría del TCA.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to start by thanking the co-chairs for including me in this apparently all-female panel that we're going to have, possibly for the first time, I think, in the ATT. So I'm going to give you an overview of the status of ATT reporting. You'll all recall, of course, that Article 13.1 of the treaty requires each state party to submit an initial report on implementation of the treaty within 1 year of the treaty entering into force. In addition, Article 13.3 requires states parties to submit an annual report on their imports and exports. So I'm going to start with initial reporting, giving both a global overview as well as a regional breakdown, and then I will do the same for annual reports, giving a global picture and a regional breakdown with some anecdotes on the way. So starting with initial reports, to date we have 111 states parties, as we heard this morning, and 110 of them should have submitted their initial reports by now. So that is 99% of states parties. In fact, 86 states parties have done so. So this means 78% of states parties that were due to report have reported. This means we've received an additional 2 initial reports since I gave this presentation in February. And then there are 24 states that should have submitted their initial report by now, but have not done so. So 22% of states are outstanding for their initial report. On the next slide, there's some additional information on initial reports. As you will recall, states parties have the option to request that their initial report not be made public. 21 states have requested that their initial reports not be made public. That is 24% of initial reports submitted. So these reports are available to states parties on the restricted area of the website only. We've also indicated whether initial reports were submitted on time. With respect to initial reports we've received so far, 42 of them were received on time or before they were due. That is 49%, almost half. Finally, a total of 73 states that submitted their initial reports, that is 85%, have used the reporting template in their submissions. 1 state so far has used the revised version of the initial reporting template endorsed by CSP8 last year for its original initial report. I'd also like to remind states that have not yet submitted their initial reports especially those of you that are new to the treaty, that filling out the initial reporting template is a useful way to take stock of what measures you have taken to implement the treaty and where there might be gaps in implementation and where you might need assistance. I realize that it can be quite a daunting document. It is 17 pages long, but most of the questions in the reporting template are yes/no questions. Article 13 also stipulates states parties shall report on any new measures undertaken to implement the treaty when appropriate. And so far, we've received 6 reports, updated reports from states parties. And the state party that submitted an updated initial report most recently used the revised reporting template adopted by CSP7. So states parties are starting to use the revised templates, which is a positive sign. We do encourage states parties to use the revised template as an opportunity to revisit their initial reports and to consider providing updated versions using the revised template. In terms of initial reporting by region, in this slide, we have an overview of participation in the reporting process by region. We have based the regional classification, as we always do, on the United Nations Statistics Division classification. The green colour indicates states parties in the region that were due to report and have done so, and the red indicates states parties in the region that were due to submit an initial report and have not yet done so. So you'll see that there is actually no region where every state party has submitted its initial report, although Europe and Oceania come very close. Moving on now to the annual reports. The chart in this slide gives a summary of the percentage of states parties that were due to submit annual reports and have done so far for all the reporting years, that is 2015 to 2020. So we can see that 84% of states parties due to report in 2015 did so, whereas for 2020, only 60% have done so far. But of course, we need to keep in mind that there were fewer states parties in 2015, so fewer states had an obligation to report. Nevertheless, we can see that there's been a decline in the rate of reporting. The analysis looks slightly different if you look at the actual number of annual reports received each year. So we received more reports in 2020 than 2015. So in 2020, we received 63 reports. In 2015, we received 51. But more states were due to report because there were more states parties to the treaty with a reporting obligation now. But we should also remember that states are continuing to submit reports even several years after they are due. So if we take a look at the figures presented to you, in February, you can see, I hope, in the slightly faded column to the left, the figures from February. So we didn't receive any new reports for 2015 since February, but we have received an additional report for 2016 and 17, 2 new reports for 2018, 3 reports for 2019, and 2 reports for 2020 since February. And in fact, I should also mention we received an additional annual report for 2019 approximately 1 hour ago. Unfortunately, I was not able to incorporate that into the slides, but it will be online shortly. Now, our assumption is that these additional reports submitted since February were as a consequence of reminder letters that were issued by the President of the conference. So earlier this month, we sent out letters on behalf of the President to 50 states who have outstanding reports. We gave details of which reports were outstanding, and we provided copies of the reporting templates to these states in their respective languages. We received 6 annual reports and 2 initial reports from some of the states that we targeted. And that was after the letters were sent. So I think it's safe to say that states were inspired by the reminder letters, and certainly this form of outreach by the President should and will continue. We'll now have a look at annual reporting by region, and I realize this is a bit of a busy slide to take into account, but it will be available online for your prolonged review. This chart shows us percentage of states parties in each region that should have submitted annual reports each year and did so by region and by year. So, for example, the first set of columns shows reporting by states parties in Africa. The dark blue column, the first column, tells us that 71% of states parties in Africa that should have reported in 2015 did so. The yellow column tells us that 46% did so in 2016. Orange column tells us 29% did in 2017. The green column tells us that 36% did in 2018. The aqua blue tells us 30% did in 2019, and the purple tells us that 27% have so far done so for 2020. And so you can see the yearly rates of reporting for each region as you move across the chart. On this next slide, we've included information on how many states requested that their annual reports be made available to states parties only. And we can see that this has risen from 2 reports for 2015, which was 4% of the reports submitted, to 20 or 32% in 2020. So there has been a steady increase in the number of reports that are restricted. Of the 361 reports, annual reports we've received in total between 2015 and 2020, some 60 of them are available to states parties only. So that is 17% of annual reports submitted. Other observations we can make regarding restricted reports include the fact that 14 of them, that is 20%, are actually nil reports. In other words, the state that reported that there were no exports or imports in the year in question. In addition, 24 of the restricted reports, or 40%, also indicate the reporting state has withheld commercially sensitive and or national security related data in accordance with Article 13.3. So those are just the statistics within the restricted reports. The trend towards restricted reporting looks set to continue. We have received 6 annual reports so far for 2021, and 5 of those 6 reports are only available to states parties. They have been restricted. Let me say that again. 5 out of 6 reports received so far for 2021 are not publicly available. With respect to timeliness, states parties are due to submit their annual reports by the 31st of May each year. We see a lot of states parties submitting them 2 or 3 days after the deadline, and so then we give them a grace period, and anyone who reports within 7 days of the deadline is considered to have submitted on time. And this slide gives an indication of how many states parties submitted their annual reports on time each year. So on average, between 55 and 75% of states parties submit their annual reports on time. On a final note, we've prepared a slide that gives us an indication of how many states parties have submitted all the annual reports they were due to submit over the years. So in this pie chart, the green segment tells us that 60 states parties, that is 57% of states due to submit an annual report, have submitted an annual report every year that they were supposed to. So if they were supposed to submit 6 reports by now, they have submitted 6 reports. If they're supposed to have submitted 2, they've submitted 2, and so on. So they fulfilled their annual reporting obligation 100% in full. The yellow segment tells us that 15 states, or 14% of states parties due to submit an annual report, have done so. This means these 15 states parties have submitted at least 1 annual report, but not all the annual reports they're required to submit over the years. And I should mention that the report that was submitted this morning actually brings that state into full compliance. So the numbers now change from 14 partial compliant reporters and 61 full reporters. And of course, the red segment tells us that there are 30 states parties, 29% of states parties due to submit an annual report, that have never submitted an annual report. So maybe they should have submitted 5 reports by now, or 2, but they've submitted none. And as I explained in February, the purpose of this analysis is to help us tailor our outreach on reporting. We feel it's important to distinguish between the states parties that have submitted at least some reports that were due and those that have never submitted an annual report. If a state party has managed to submit 1 or 2 annual reports, but not all of them, then they would likely put different questions to them. We would likely put different questions to them as to why they haven't fulfilled all their reporting obligations. And a state that has never submitted an annual report may be facing quite different challenges. Maybe they're not even aware that they have to submit an annual report. So when we target these different groups to determine why they have not submitted their annual reports, all or any of them, we'll be asking different questions and presumably dealing with different challenges. So this slide is here to illustrate how we plan to approach partial and non-reporting states as part of our outreach to improve reporting. Now, if we compare this chart very briefly to the version I showed you in February, we can see that there were 55 states that had submitted all their reporting obligations. So since February, 5 of the partial reporters have submitted outstanding annual reports. This is partly attributable, as I mentioned, to the outreach conducted by the President, or at least there is a correlation between the reminder letters being sent and the reports being submitted. And with that, I thank the co-chairs once again and confirm that, as with all of our presentations, we will be making these slides available on the ATT website very shortly. Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias a la Secretaría del TCA por esta presentación tan detallada, así como por su trabajo continuo en la gestión de la presentación de informes en el marco del TCA. Pero antes de proceder, me gustaría cederle la palabra a mi copresidenta Sabine para una pequeña información. Sabine.
Yes, thank you, Grisel. And to all members of the working group, I would like to ask for a moment of your forbearance, because as you may not know, this was Sarah's last presentation to the working group and giving us an update on the status of reporting. So we wanted to mark the moment and say a proper goodbye and thank you for all the work that you have done in our working group. You tirelessly updated the working group on the status of reporting, did invaluable outreach work, for example, by setting up the informal peer-to-peer network, sent countless reminders, and always kept the information on reporting on the website up to date until the wee small hours of the morning yesterday, as a little bird told us. We are so sorry to see you leave, wish you all the best in your future travels and endeavors, and hope you are assured of all our gratitude for all your efforts in the working group. We have a small token of appreciation for you.
Bueno, de vuelta a los negocios aquí. Las copresidentas quisieran reiterar que las obligaciones de presentación de informes son una parte integral del tratado y son fundamentales para su implementación efectiva. Si bien no existe la obligación de hacer que los informes estén disponibles en el área pública del sitio web del TCA, y por lo tanto para todas las partes interesadas, ello contribuye en gran medida al objetivo del tratado, que es de transparencia y fomento de la confianza en el comercio mundial de armas, y puede facilitar oportunidades de cooperación y asistencia técnica. Las copresidentas y la Secretaría del TCA quedamos a su disposición para cualquier apoyo que podamos brindar a los Estados partes en el cumplimiento de sus obligaciones de presentación de informes. Ahora, además de la excelente presentación de Sara de la Secretaría del TCA, derivada de su mandato formal de monitorear la situación de la presentación de informes de conformidad con el artículo 18.3a del TCA, hemos invitado a la señora Rachel Stoll, vicepresidenta de Programas de Investigación en el Stimson Center, y la señora Karina Solmirano, coordinadora del ATT Monitor, para que realicen una presentación complementaria sobre las tendencias y desafíos de la presentación de informes y la importancia del desglose. La presentación adicional tiene la intención de agregar un poco más de contexto y una perspectiva diferente sobre las tendencias en la presentación de informes para enriquecer nuestra discusión y proporcionar algunas recomendaciones sobre las mejores prácticas. Entonces, les pido un momentito para que nos acompañen Rachel y Karina y le podamos ceder la palabra.
We have a small technical pause as the presenter needs her glasses because we're all getting a bit old up here and nobody can see anything. Thank you for your patience. I'm very pleased to be here today to share with you some of our research from the past year that we've been taking stock of the first 6 years of ATT reporting and identifying opportunities to enhance reporting efforts for the years to come. Today, I will share with you some of the key findings and recommendations that have emerged as part of this work, and I will discuss 3 main issues which cover 2 agenda items. One is the transparency issues that we've identified in both ATT annual and initial reporting, the challenges that states face in preparing the reports, and then finally, steps that can be taken to improve reporting and advance the ATT's transparency aims. I want to start by expressing my appreciation for the governments of Germany, the Netherlands, and Switzerland for their financial support for this work. The most significant obstacle to achieving the ATT's transparency objectives has been the lack of universal compliance with the treaty's initial and annual reporting requirements. And Sarah just gave us a wonderful presentation on where those gaps may lie. But I think the takeaway from her presentation for me was very much that it's never too late to submit past reports. I really welcome all of the recent reports that have been added, even if it creates a data analysis challenge for those of us very late at night. But I think it's really important that we recognize the states that are submitting reports that are several years past their due date. That is absolutely fine, and we encourage that. I also think it's an important time to remind states of something Sarah mentioned in her report, that states are obligated to report on new measures that they have undertaken. And I've sat in this meeting room with many of you for many, many years, and you share wonderful things that you are doing to implement the Arms Trade Treaty and changes that you have made to your national systems. And I encourage you to update your reports to reflect that really good practice, that we can see the impact of how the ATT has helped modify national control systems. I also think that the slide that Sarah presented towards the end of her presentation about how the percentage of states that are fully compliant is growing in ATT reporting is really important, and that we're seeing some 2020 reports coming in now. As you are preparing your 2020 reports that are still needing to be submitted, don't forget that May 31st deadline is also approaching quite rapidly. A second transparency challenge is the marked increase in the submission of private initial and annual reports, which are only available to other states' parties and the ATT Secretariat. And I think an important statistic here is if you look at the first 25 initial reports that were submitted, all of those were publicly available. If you look at the most recent 25 submitted initial reports, 64% are private. So nearly a quarter of all initial reports are private, and the trend has been that more reports are becoming private as we go. The same trend is found in an annual reports, where only 4% of the 2015 annual reports were private, but at least 32% of those submitted for 2020 are private, which is the highest record of annual reporting so far. It's not just due to first-time reporters electing to submit private reports, but also to states' parties that actually have shifted from providing public reports to private reporting. A third transparency issue, and one you'll hear more from my colleagues today, is that the insights provided by initial and annual reports are often limited by information that's outdated, withheld or otherwise omitted, or aggregated. Because relatively few states' parties have provided updates to their initial reports, many initial reports contain outdated information, but people like me can't say that it's outdated because we need you to actually implement them or update them, excuse me. In addition, initial reports
often contain less detailed information than other publicly available reports on specific elements of a state's national control system. The revised initial reporting template explicitly invites states to provide more detailed information about various aspects of their national control systems and includes new questions relating to international assistance. And so I would strongly encourage states, when they update their initial reports or submit their delayed initial reports, to use the new template and provide detailed and specific information. I want to thank the working group for your efforts in encouraging those changes and the Secretariat for also emphasizing the new template. Information has also been omitted or withheld, often without explanation, from several states' parties' annual reports, including the number or value of weapons imported and exported, the importing or exporting state, and whether the information contained within the report reflects actual or authorized transfers. In addition, some states' parties aggregate their information in their reports in ways that prevent detailed analyses of weapons flows, including by reporting on transfers to or from groups of states without indicating the number of value that was transferred to or from each state, and reporting on small arms and light weapons transfers in aggregate. And as I say, you'll hear more about that later today. Despite efforts to minimize the challenges posed by ATT reporting, we know that many states' parties face obstacles in fulfilling their ATT reporting requirements. In a survey that was conducted by Stimson and CSP8 to solicit states' perspectives on various aspects of ATT implementation, nearly 2/3 of the 34 responding states' parties said they have faced challenges in preparing their ATT reports. In their survey responses, states provided valuable insights into the specific reporting challenges that they have encountered, which are captured in Stimson's latest report, Taking Stock of ATT Reporting Trends and Challenges, and I have copies if people would like to take those with them today. We'll also be hosting an event next Wednesday to discuss the report in more detail, and oh, it's just going on its own. I don't know how to. There we go. Okay. Won't be able to unpack all of the findings of that report, but I want to give you the 4 main reporting challenges, since that's the next agenda item that you will be discussing, and these come directly from states' parties themselves. The first set of challenges stems from a lack of awareness and understanding of ATT obligations. And we found that many states, including longstanding states' parties, have expressed uncertainty about what, how, and when to report, which obviously presents challenges to fulfilling your obligations. Second, many states' parties face capacity and resource challenges and have described the negative impact that limited time, personnel, and/or information systems have had on their reporting efforts. Third are internal and bureaucratic challenges. And states described obstacles posed by poor coordination across government offices or agencies, difficulties accessing or compiling or assessing relevant information. And in fact, in the survey of the 34 states' parties, coordination and information sharing was the most commonly cited challenge for both initial and annual reports. And then lastly, states' parties described facing political and security challenges, including where reporting efforts are hampered by competing government priorities or concerns or a lack of understanding about what information is shared with whom and whether or not that violates certain security strategies. I want to end on a positive note, although I think I've been rather positive for me for a presentation. There are a number of steps that states' parties and other stakeholders can take to help overcome some of the barriers to reporting and address the issues that I just mentioned. One of the most important steps is for states' parties to ensure that they have national systems in place to overcome and to facilitate effective intergovernmental coordination. This includes establishing not just a point of contact for the treaty, but a point of contact on reporting, developing interagency coordination mechanisms, and an interagency submission calendar. Second, states parties should have in place robust record-keeping and database management systems and practices for streamlined information sharing and working with the private sector to develop useful partnerships to access transfer details. States parties can also take steps to promote accurate and transparent reporting by periodically visiting the ATT Secretariat's website and reviewing previously submitted reports. If you discover any discrepancies or the information is outdated, you can notify the Secretariat and submit an updated report. In addition, if you notice that a report is incorrectly classified as public or private, you can let the Secretariat know. If circumstances change and you had a report that was private and it no longer needs to be, you can change the status of that report to public, and the Secretariat can change that on the website. Finally, states parties, and we talk about this quite a bit, should identify and leverage synergies across reporting frameworks to ease your reporting burden. I think there's been tremendous support provided by the Secretariat, the Working Group on Transparency and Reporting, civil society, and other stakeholders that has proved enormously helpful in enhancing national reporting efforts. But there's always more that we can do, and Sarah mentioned some of those in her presentation. But just to be a bit more specific, these actors should engage in detailed and coordinated outreach to work with reporting states parties that are having difficulty continuing to fulfill their responsibilities, as well as non-reporting states parties, to investigate the reasons for not reporting. I gave you the 4 sort of buckets that those challenges fall into, but each state party has different needs and challenges. We should also continue to investigate why some states parties reported earlier in the cycle and then no longer report, or have shifted from public to private reporting and work to address the circumstances motivating some of these negative transparency trends. We also need to address reporting concerns, uncertainties, and confusion that has persisted over the years. I'm hoping the FAQ document does just that. And we need to monitor reporting and patterns and experiences over the coming years to evaluate the use and impact of the revised recommended reporting templates. I think we can also think about, with regards to initial reporting, we can support a peer review process to establish comprehensive national overview of treaty implementation. And these overviews could be used to create an online publicly accessible database of national implementation measures to enable further research and analysis into the ATT's impact on arms transfer regulations. I think states and the ATT Secretariat could also support the development and maintenance of a comprehensive public searchable database of initial report responses, which could help both at the national level and in aggregate allow for detailed analysis of state-by-state practices, as well as general gaps and trends in implementation, as well as help provide assistance to those that need help implementing the treaty. In the interim, the Secretariat can also provide additional information on their very extensive initial reports webpage, including insights on the date that reports were posted, some of the facts that Sarah mentioned in her presentation on-time submission, or notifications of which states have updated their reports, which would allow us to have greater insight into states parties' reporting practices and trends. I think while we note that their ATT has made significant progress towards advancing arms trade transparency, there's still more work that we can do to ensure that the ATT lives up to its full potential. The good news is that we're in the 7th year of ATT reporting, and we have a wealth of resources and good practice that states parties can leverage to implement the treaty, and there are also opportunities to expand reporting assistance that's available to states parties. I think the European Union's decision to provide additional funding to support the Secretariat's ATT implementation initiatives is a great start. There's also an important symbolic opportunity on the horizon. 3 April 2023 is going to mark the 10th anniversary of the ATT's adoption, and it's a significant milestone and one that states can use if they have overdue reports or want to provide updates to their initial reports as a target date for submitting those reports and reaffirming the commitment to the ATT transparency. I look forward to working with all of you to support those efforts, and I'm happy to assist in any way that I can.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you to the ATT Secretariat, the colleagues of the Working Group on Transparency and Reporting for this invitation and the opportunity for the ATT Monitor to make this presentation. Thank you as well, of course, to our donors who have been supporting a project that basically monitors the implementation of the ATT through independent research with the organization Control Arms. Is the presentation? There we go. Okay. Let's see. So to complement what has been said today, I would like to present some findings of our research, which is based on a methodology developed last year that sought to determine whether ATT annual reporting had lived up to the promise and requirements of the ATT. We heard today, just recently, that there is a decline in compliance rates of annual reports since 2015. There is a decline in the percentage of annual reports that are made publicly available, and there is a worrying increase in the submission of private reports or confidential reports to the ATT Secretariat. So progress on effective reporting has been slow also in terms of quality of information, and that's what I would like to discuss and present to you today. So in addition to the obligation to submit an annual report on arms exports and imports set out in Article 13.3 of the treaty, the monitor considers that states parties can contribute meaningfully to the transparency aims and objectives of the ATT, that you see there under Article 1 of the treaty, if an annual report is submitted and made publicly available on the ATT Secretariat website, if it provides information that is disaggregated by weapon type, if it provides information that is disaggregated by importer and or exporter state, if it indicates that the transfer concerns to either authorized or actual transfer or both, and if it also provides the number of units or the financial value or both for each weapon type. It is important to note, however, that states parties that submit nil reports, indicating that they have no imports or exports on arms, can also contribute meaningfully to the transparency aims and objectives of the treaty. As such, we actually consider an annual report to be meaningful and transparent if it's a nil report. So we would like to encourage those states that do not have transfers on a certain year of any kind, that they can still submit a nil report, and that contributes tremendously to the transparency objectives of the treaty. So when we look at the information over time, we find that the percentage of reports each year that are meaningfully transparent is declining. And this is, of course, largely due to the overall declining compliance rates and increasing rates of confidential reporting that Sarah and Rachel just mentioned. As we can see in this slide, the percentage of meaningfully transparent reports declined from 46% to 29% in the 2015-2020 period. In 2020, only 30 states, and we actually had 29 states up to 2 days ago and realized that there was an update. So it's very welcome. So up to 30 states parties met the above criteria and submitted reports that were meaningfully transparent. So the findings of the research are a testament to the worrying drop in the quality of national reporting, that it is again happening in conjunction with the trends that were just described. As a consequence, there is now less information available on the global arms trade than in previous years. So one of the most significant ways in which publicly available reports do not meet the minimum requirement standard of transparency is through data aggregation, and especially of the categories that I just mentioned: weapon type, importer and exporter, authorized or actual transfers, and number of units or values. When information is aggregated excessively, it becomes impossible to know what weapons were transferred to whom, and it also prevents to determine whether a state party has abided by its treaty commitments. So excessive aggregation of these categories that I just mentioned was identified in 7 2020 annual reports, which represent 16% of publicly available reports. This number, however, is significantly lower than the previous year when excessive aggregation was present in 13 reports. But when we look closer to the information provided in the weapon categories of the template of the report, transfers involving small arms and light weapons continue to be the most susceptible to aggregation. In 2020, every single transfer where our research detected aggregation involved small arms and light weapons. In fact, 48% of aggregated transfers were found in this category. This is, states didn't make a distinction on whether the transfers corresponded to the small arms or the light weapons category. And moreover, 4 specific subcategories of small arms which are most prone to aggregation by importing or exporting state, the number of units or financial value, etc., are revolvers and self-loading pistols, rifles and carbines, others and small arms, there's a line of others and small arms, and assault rifles. Our analysis also allows us to draw some regional trends with regards to data aggregation and disaggregation in 2020 annual reports. Starting in the Americas, out of 6 parties that submitted publicly available reports, 5 of them fully disaggregated their transfers, so this is very positive, and 1 of them failed to disaggregate by importer or exporter. In Africa, 1 state party submitted fully disaggregated information on all of its transfers in 2020. Out of 29 states parties in Europe, 5 submitted annual reports with significant aggregation by importer or exporter or weapon type. 6 further states failed to clearly differentiate between actual or authorized transfers. And as a result, only 17 states parties in the European region reported fully disaggregated information for all their transfers. Finally, in the Asia and Oceania region, out of 4 states parties that submitted public reports, 3 of them fully disaggregated information, and 1 failed to disaggregate by weapon type. So I'm not gonna tell you all of this, don't worry. I just cover how disaggregation of data in annual reports is critical for meaningful transparency. If we go a step further in the analysis that the ATT monitor does, we also look to those annual reports that go a step beyond the categories that I just mentioned and that contribute to a higher standard of transparency. You can see the categories that we include in this specific level of analysis. You can find them in our chapter 2.1 of our last annual report that is posted on our website. One interesting thing is that because these are too many categories, no single state party provides all of this information. And we don't expect that to be the case because we assess them individual, the individual criteria in each of the countries. But for example, if we look closer to the reports that include descriptions in the transfers, the percentage of available reports, the public available reports, has increased slightly over time, as you can see there in that figure. In 2020, 8 states parties included descriptions for all the transfers they reported, and a further 20 included descriptions of some of their transfers. So overall, 17 states parties have had a consistent record of including descriptions of at least some of their transfers in every public report that they were required to submit since 2015. Oh, sorry, let's see. Well, I don't know, yeah. Let's see if I go back, maybe it changes, okay. Yeah, this one, okay. Oh, sorry. So despite this number that only is, 8 states parties included descriptions in 2020 of all the transfers, the good news is that there are some reports that really go beyond what the ATT requires, and this is very, very positive. Here we see an example of one annual report of 2020 that not only includes all the information that we would expect in terms of the categories where we like to see disaggregation, but it also goes beyond and includes information regarding the descriptions and comments. So in this particular case, we can see that this annual report provides descriptions of the make, model, and caliber of the imported weapons, and it also provides details of the end use and end user information, which is very relevant in the context of transparency and confidence building principles of the Arms Trade Treaty. So I wanted to end with some general conclusions and recommendations. I know that this issue will be dealt in depth a little bit later as well. First, I think that improving compliance in reporting obligations must also be combined with improving the quality of reporting. We know that there is a lower compliance rate or a downward trend in compliance rate. We would like to not only see that compliance goes up, but also that the quality of the information goes up. So states parties should go beyond the minimum requirements that they find in the ATT and include all this information that we just described and mentioned. Second, disaggregation on arms transfers provides enormous benefits to all ATT stakeholders and the global arms trade. And I think that although disaggregation is not a mandatory requirement of the treaty, it is a vital component to achieving the aims and objectives of the treaty, and especially Article 1. And as we just recently saw, a few examples of good practice in reporting are emerging in recent years. And so we encourage states parties that stand out in their reporting practices to consider sharing their experiences with those that might have facing some of the challenges that also Rachel mentioned when it comes to fulfilling their reporting obligations. So I end up there. I thank you again, and we wait for the questions.
Muchas gracias a ambas, Rachel y Karina, por su presentación y sus valiosos aportes. Esperamos que sus recomendaciones puedan guiar a los Estados partes a abordar los diferentes desafíos que enfrentan en el cumplimiento de sus obligaciones de presentación de informes. Me gustaría dar la palabra a los participantes que deseen compartir sus puntos de vista sobre la situación de la presentación de los informes, como fue presentado por Sara de la Secretaría del TCA, y también formular preguntas a todas las presentaciones que se han realizado hasta el momento. No sé si hay alguna solicitud aquí en sala o en la sala virtual por el momento. Veo una solicitud de la palabra de Rumania, seguido de España. Rumania, por favor.
Thank you for giving me the floor. Romania expresses its appreciation to co-chairs Ms. Sabine Wieser of the Netherlands and Ms. Grisel Rodriguez of Panama for their dedicated work and leadership of this working group. I also want to thank the ATT Secretariat and Ms. Sarah Parker for the general overview and the updates of the reporting status provided, and also to Stimson Center and Control Arms for their detailed presentations based on their research and studies. Romania stated many times that the transparency is a fundamental element for a good functioning of the Arms Trade Treaty, leading to confidence building among states, and reporting is a cornerstone of this treaty. In this respect, Romania submitted an updated initial report on 7th of February this year, as the national legislation and procedures were amended during last year. We used the reporting templates as endorsed and recommended by the 7th Conference of State Parties, and it includes highlighted changes made in each section and also provides a summary description of the updates made in Annex A. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Romania, through the Department for Export Controls, is by law responsible for the ATT implementation, including the preparation and submission of the initial and annual reports and information sharing. Currently, the department is in process of preparation of the annual report, where it will be included also data provided by the Ministry of Interior on exports and imports of firearms for civilian use, so that Romania will be able to submit this annual report in due course by 31st of May 2022. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias. Siguiente orador en mi lista es España, seguido por Barbados y la Unión Europea. España, por favor.
Muchas gracias, señoras copresidentas. Lamentablemente, este es un problema común a otros tratados. No nos enfrentamos a una situación singular. Y, sin embargo, en la parte positiva tengo que felicitar tanto a la Secretaría como a las copresidentas y a nuestros ponentes por el excelente trabajo de análisis que hacen de las causas del problema, porque de este modo podemos entenderlo mejor, buscar las soluciones y, sobre todo, seguir las recomendaciones que nos han hecho. En este sentido, me gustaría ser proactivo y proponer nuevos recursos que nos ayuden a invertir la tendencia decreciente de los informes nacionales. Por ejemplo, propongo que organicemos en la próxima conferencia o en el próximo grupo de trabajo un taller sobre cómo han de hacerse los informes con el apoyo de las organizaciones que nos han hecho estas recomendaciones, o otra posible idea sería la creación de un grupo de amigos de las copresidentas, en el sentido de que otros estados podamos implicarnos en la labor de seguimiento de los países que no presentan sus informes y prestarles la ayuda necesaria para que así lo hagan. De este modo mantendremos un nivel de actividad y podremos intentar, por lo menos, invertir la tendencia. Muchas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, embajador, por esas excelentes recomendaciones. Las tomaremos en cuenta y le deseo la palabra a Barbados, seguido por la Unión Europea.
First, let me thank you for the enormous work that has been done by this working group and for giving me the opportunity to present on behalf of the government of Barbados. I am happy that in these preparatory meetings, much emphasis has been placed on diversion and transparency and reporting, with transparency being the key word. I firmly believe that if there is no transparency in our reporting, there will be an avenue for diversion. This diversion can be as a result of negligence, where no proper systems are in place, or it can be deliberate. The insistence on having end-user certificates is critical in our efforts to ensuring transparency and also in the prevention of diversion. Barbados is a small island of 166 square miles and has a population of 280,000 people. We are part of the Caribbean and we are strategically located between the firearm manufacturers in North America and those in South America. Barbados is not a producer of firearms and ammunition, and all firearms are restricted in Barbados. We do, however, import on a limited basis for domestic use, for the police, military, and citizens who have been issued permits to carry small arms for personal protection. In addition, we do export on a very small scale to neighboring islands where permits have been issued by their governments for citizens to possess these firearms. If in my annual report for a given year, I am saying that I imported, for example, 100 firearms and exported 20 of those, the report for the country from which I imported should reflect that their export that they exported the 100 firearms that I received. Similarly, the country to whom I exported those 20 firearms, their report should reflect that they imported 20 firearms from me. Any discrepancies in these figures could be an indication of possible diversion. The issue of firearms tracing is another critical area that could assist in identifying diversion. States that encourage and mandate that all recovered firearms are traced are in a better position to identify those that have been diverted and who may be responsible for the diversion. I therefore encourage all states to make use of the ATF's e-trace and the Interpol IARMS to facilitate the tracing of firearms, and that all parties, include the Working Group on Diversion, do everything within their power to make the tracing of firearms a priority and have the reporting of firearm traces included in the annual report template. My question to all of this is, who verifies these reports? And what systems, if any, have been put in place to ensure the veracity of these reports? Finally, on the issue of ammunition, I believe that some consideration should be given to reporting on ammunition imports and exports. We all know that firearms are of no use to anyone without the availability of ammunition. It is our experience in the Caribbean that when there is a scarcity of ammunition, criminals use their weapons sparingly. And with the abundance of ammunition, they use them indiscriminately. The evidence of which is reflected in the number of cartridge cases recovered at scenes of crime and the frequency at which they use these firearms. This does not only apply to small arms and light weapons, but to all forms of artillery. I therefore urge that consideration be given to reporting on ammunition imports and exports. With these few words, I thank you.
Muchas gracias a Barbados por presentar esa perspectiva subregional y también por esta pregunta que provoca la reflexión sobre los futuros trabajos del grupo de trabajo. Y olvidé mencionar a Rumania, agradecerle los esfuerzos que está realizando para presentar su informe anual dentro del plazo establecido. Con esto quisiera cederle la palabra a la Unión Europea, seguido por Bélgica.
Thank you very much, Madam Co-Chair. On behalf of the European Union and its member states, I would like to thank Mrs. Sabine Visser of the Netherlands and you, Mrs. Griselda Carmen Rodriguez Ramirez of Panama, for your leadership of this working group on transparency and reporting and for preparing an interesting and highly relevant set of presentations from various actors. Building up on these presentations, I would like to reiterate that transparency and reporting are key elements leading to confidence building among states and enabling accountability and scrutiny for arms export decisions taken by national authorities. Also, I would like to reiterate that reporting on arms exports and imports represents one of the cornerstone obligations of the ATT. The EU once again calls on all states parties to fulfill their reporting obligations in a timely and transparent manner, and we encourage all states parties to report publicly as a good way of contributing to the treaty's aim of transparency on arms export decisions. Non-confidential reporting increases the relevance of the reports and facilitates information sharing on transfer decisions. And the last remark, if you allow me, the EU is currently preparing its annual report on EU member states' arms exports with data on the year 2021. The report will become available shortly after the summer via our user-friendly public online database on the EES website. Thank you very much, Madam Co-Chair.
Muchas gracias a la Unión Europea. Sobre todo va a ser muy interesante ver este informe que están elaborando y que será presentado durante el verano. Y con esto les doy la palabra a Bélgica, que es el último orador de la lista. Bélgica, por favor.
Thank you, co-chairs. And thank you to both co-chairs for putting this topic on the agenda and for providing us with these very insightful presentations. As a former co-chair of this working group, I want to clarify a bit the aggregation of data on small arms and light weapons in our Belgian annual reports. As we explained in our initial report, in Belgium, arms transfer control is to a large extent a sovereign competence of its defederated entities, the Flemish, Walloon, and the Brussels capital regions. The competent authorities in the respective regions apply different rules, policies, and practices, also when it comes to public reporting. And these differences are also reflected in the ATT annual report. Different methods of aggregation to reporting small arms and light weapons were used to accommodate the concerns of one region that disaggregation into small arms and light weapons subcategories would impose an unnecessary administrative burden in terms of collecting and processing data and would disclose commercially sensitive information, taking into account that there is only one major operating company in each segment of small arms and light weapons. So that is why the Belgian report includes aggregated data. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias a Bélgica. Veo que hay una solicitud de la palabra del Reino Unido y con esto quisiera cerrar ya la lista de oradores para este punto de la agenda, dado que tenemos tiempo limitado para abordar los otros puntos que nos corresponden. Reino Unido, por favor.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair, and thank you to the panelists for their presentations, for their excellent presentations. The UK is grateful for the continued focus on ensuring transparent and prompt reporting to the ATT, to which we attach great importance. The reporting template now allows states to select an option for their ATT report to be shared with the UN Register of Conventional Arms, UNROCA. We think that this is a really sensible and useful innovation, which helps to reduce the reporting burden on states. However, we understand that in practice, there is not yet a mechanism for this information sharing to take place. Therefore, we would be grateful if the Secretariat could look to work with UNODA to ensure that this happens in practice. There is otherwise a risk that states will believe that they have submitted to UNROCA when they have not. Thank you.
Muchas gracias a la delegación del Reino Unido. Y quiero aprovechar también a agradecer a la Secretaría del TCA, Rachel y Karina, y a todos los participantes que hicieron uso de la palabra para este rico intercambio. Las copresidentas quisieran recordar a los Estados partes que la fecha límite para presentar el informe anual es el 31 de mayo. Al hacerlo, favor utilizar las plantillas de informes revisadas que fueron endosadas en la 7ª Conferencia de Estados partes. También nos gustaría señalar que todavía es posible entregar los informes que debían presentarse en años anteriores y alentamos a todos los Estados partes que no hayan presentado informes en años anteriores a que procedan a hacerlo. También recomendamos encarecidamente a los representantes de los Estados partes a consultar el sitio web del TCA para verificar si su informe está publicado de acuerdo a sus preferencias. Con esto cerramos este tema de la agenda y pasamos al siguiente tema sobre los desafíos relacionados con la presentación de informes. En aras del tiempo, las copresidentas presentarán al mismo tiempo las 4 tareas que debemos abordar en esta reunión e invitamos a los participantes a que posteriormente hagan uso de la palabra sobre alguna o todas estas tareas. Bajo este tema de la agenda, los participantes tienen la oportunidad de compartir cualquier desafío que estén enfrentando para presentar los informes iniciales y anuales de manera oportuna y precisa, así como las soluciones y buenas prácticas para abordar estos desafíos. Además, los alentamos a proponer y debatir otros medios para ayudar a los Estados partes a abordar las dificultades que plantea la presentación de informes. Ya escuchamos una propuesta de España y esto obviamente mientras que se continúen implementando las medidas existentes. Con respecto a la estrategia de divulgación sobre la presentación de informes, invitamos a los Estados partes, la sociedad civil y las organizaciones regionales a informar al grupo de trabajo sobre las iniciativas enfocadas en mejorar el cumplimiento de los deberes de presentación de informes. Las copresidentas alientan a los beneficiarios del Fondo Fiduciario de Contribuciones Voluntarias y otros mecanismos de asistencia a seguir informando sobre sus experiencias y avances. En cuanto al documento de orientación tipo preguntas frecuentes, recordarán que en nuestra primera reunión, la Secretaría del TCA, en nombre de las copresidentas, presentó un conjunto de enmiendas propuestas al documento que resultaron, entre otras cosas, de las nuevas plantillas de presentación de informes que fueron endosadas por la 7ª Conferencia de Estados Partes. Las enmiendas propuestas presentadas por las copresidentas gozaron de un amplio apoyo entre los participantes del grupo de trabajo. Algunos de ellos ofrecieron sugerencias y un participante recordó sus reservas expresadas en la 7ª Conferencia de Estados Partes respecto de las plantillas de informes revisadas. Van a encontrar que en la versión revisada, en el primer anexo de la agenda anotada, le hicimos un cambio pequeño. Las enmiendas que se introdujeron anteriormente al texto del artículo 13.3 en la página 4 de las preguntas frecuentes se eliminaron para así reflejar el lenguaje actual del artículo 13.3. Me gustaría dar la palabra a los participantes que deseen compartir sus puntos de vista sobre el proyecto revisado de enmiendas propuestas al documento y las otras cuestiones bajo este tema de la agenda. Con esto abro el piso si hay alguna solicitud, ya sea aquí en la sala de conferencia o en la sala virtual, sobre estos temas. Pues en este caso debemos entender que el documento, como fue revisado, goza del apoyo de la membresía, por lo cual las copresidentas no tendrán que trabajar en una versión actualizada y simplemente someteremos esa versión a la consideración de las Estados Partes, ¿no? ¿Alguien solicitó la palabra aquí? Le cedemos la palabra al Estado de Palestina.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And before I start my comments, I'd just like to make sure if we're still on agenda item 2. Yeah, okay. So at the outset, the State of Palestine commends the working group co-chairs for their excellent leadership of this group, as well as the ATT Secretariat on all their comprehensive efforts to support states parties in fully implementing reporting obligations. We thank you for the draft of the FAQ-type guidance document on the annual reporting obligation and would like to make the following comments on the document. First, in the table of contents on page 5, we recommend inserting right after Roman numeral 1 the theme, the benefits of comprehensive and consistent annual reporting on arms transfers under the ATT. As elaborated by the Stimson Center, such benefits include, inter alia, enhancing awareness of regional and global arms flows, supporting efforts to monitor whether weapons use complies with international human rights and humanitarian law, providing a baseline of legally transferred arms that can be used to identify illicit arms and their potential sources, etc. Second, in the title on page 7, we recommend adding the word reporting, such that the title would read, Treaty Reporting Obligation and Other Relevant ATT Provisions. Third, on the same page, we recommend adding a reference to Article 13.1 in order to ensure a differentiation is made between annual and initial reporting. Fourth, on page 28, question 46, we recommend to more comprehensively answer the question as to the consequences of submitting incorrect information by reflecting the following element. Incorrect information undermines the promotion of arms trade transparency and the ATT's object and purpose and limits understanding of global weapon flows. This in turn prevents accurate assessments of whether states parties are complying with the ATT's provisions and makes it difficult to evaluate whether the treaty is contributing towards a reduction in human suffering, strengthening international and regional peace, security, and promoting transparency, thereby building confidence among states parties. In view of the time constraints, we will limit our oral comments to this statement, but reserve the right to submit additional comments in writing. I thank you, Madam Chair.
Muchísimas gracias al Estado de Palestina y más bien íbamos a invitarlos a que presentaran estos comentarios por escrito, nos van a llegar a la Secretaría y a las copresidentas para poderlos reflejar en la versión revisada que vamos a presentar en la conferencia de Estados partes y más bien también invitar a los estados que han escuchado estas propuestas también reaccionar y sobre todo que nos indiquen si existiese alguna línea roja, que esperamos que no. Le cedemos la palabra ahorita a Japón. Japón, por favor.
Okay. At the outset, Japan would like to express its sincere appreciation. Can you hear me? Okay.
Sí, podemos escucharla perfectamente.
At the outset, Japan would like to express its Pardon. Okay. Japan, at the outset, Japan would like to express its sincere appreciation to the co-chairs for their dedication to the work of this working group. Japan attaches much importance to transparency in international transfer of conventional arms. In this relation, Japan welcomes the development of the guidance document for national point of contact as a part of the project supported by the EU to help state parties better implement their treaty obligations, including submission of their reports. We also appreciate the briefing by the Secretariat on the work on reporting on Monday. We hope that these efforts will encourage many state parties to fulfill their reporting obligations. Japan, having submitted its annual reports online, would like to take this opportunity to call on all state parties to fulfill their obligation to submit their initial and annual reports, which will certainly help towards promoting transparency in conventional arms transfer. Thank you, co-chairs.
Muchísimas gracias a Japón. Estamos viendo si hay alguna otra solicitud, pero vemos que en sala no, en la sala virtual tampoco. Con ello agotamos entonces la lista de oradores y en nombre de las copresidentas deseamos agradecerles a todos por este fructífero debate y las valiosas ideas que han sido presentadas. Trabajaremos en la versión final para la consideración de la octava conferencia de Estados partes, pero sí les pedimos por favor que nos envíen aquellos que hicieron propuestas, nos las envíen por escrito. Con esto concluimos nuestras discusiones bajo este tema de la agenda. Ahora me gustaría pasarle las riendas a mi copresidenta Sabine para que dirija los debates sobre el tema 3 de la agenda.
Thank you, Grizel. Under the agenda item on substantive reporting and transparency issues, the co-chairs have invited Mr. Paul Holtum, head of the Conventional Arms and Ammunition Program of UNIDIR, to provide a presentation on the aggregation of data and annual reports. As Paul makes his way down to the podium, I will set up his presentation. While the co-chairs acknowledge that the treaty does not prescribe a certain level of disaggregation, the way and detail with which information in annual reports is presented, just like the decision on whether or not to make annual reports public, can fundamentally contribute or distract from the ATT's objective to raise transparency and thereby promote responsible action and confidence building among stakeholders in the area of arms exports. This was already stressed today in the presentation by Ms. Solmerano. It therefore behooves us to look at best practices in aggregation. Paul's presentation today is a follow-up to the presentation done by UNIDIR during the session in April of 2021, which provided a general scene-setting presentation on the issue of aggregation in the ATT. Today, Paul will take us on a bit more of a deep dive on aggregation practices with concrete examples from ATT annual reports. So without further ado, I would like to invite Paul to take the floor.
Good afternoon, or good evening, or good morning for those of you joining online. Thank you, co-chairs, for the invitation to participate in the working group on transparency reporting and indeed to provide a deep dive. Thank you also for giving me the chance to share the podium with Sarah on her last appearance here. That's a great privilege and an honor. I'll start my presentation with just a short explanation of what I see as the purpose or the intention for this presentation, before providing a short reminder on what we have as guidance in the voluntary reporting document, the questions and answers guide, with regard to aggregation. My presentation will then consist of, as Sabina mentioned, sharing some of the ways in which data is provided in annual reports in recent years, and especially for those reports that have been made publicly available on the website of the ATT Secretariat, with regards to different types of aggregation. And indeed, as promised, this is a very deep dive, but I'll try and do it as quickly as possible. I'll go through the way in which some of the categories covered by Article 2.1 A to G have information which we would regard as essential, which is missing. I'll then focus on the issue of aggregated data for small arms and light weapons. As Karina already mentioned, this is where we see most of these practices. Now, all of us are aware here and regularly reminded throughout this session that a key objective of the Arms Trade Treaty is promoting transparency by states parties to build confidence. And last year's draft report of the co-chairs working group called for a follow-up on UNIDIR's presentation during the CSP7 cycle. My intention today is to promote discussion and an exchange between states parties just to show some of the ways in which data is being aggregated in annual reports and to better understand why that is so. I don't name any states parties that I use. It's more a test of your knowledge to see whether you've been looking at these reports, and also for some of you to identify your reports and perhaps intervene to explain why a certain approach has been taken. Before sharing with you some of the elements that you'll see in the different reports, I just wanted to share a reminder from the FAQs that it's a common understanding, not a treaty obligation, to provide a certain minimum information requested in the reporting form for each category. And indeed, Karina, I think, gave an excellent explanation as to what should be meaningful transparency. But at a minimum, it's expected that states parties will be providing information on the number of items or the financial value of exported, imported conventional arms by category, and also to provide information on the exporting state or the final importing state. And I think this assumption is there also because we have in Article 13 a reference to the UN Register of Conventional Arms, and this is the type of information that one is expected to provide under that instrument too. And I also wanted to make reference to the FAQ guide statement that for reasons of consistency and continuity, it's desirable that states parties' choices, once made, remain stable over time. So the majority of publicly available annual reports do provide this minimum information, as Karina's already mentioned. I'm just going to show you some of those cases which are a little bit different. Apologies if it's super small. This is the best that I can do with PowerPoint technology and my limited tech skills. But this is an extract from a report on imports of items contained in categories A to G of Article 2.1, or major conventional arms for shorthand, and it shows that this particular state party has indicated that it's reporting on actual imports, it's provided the number of items per category, but it's not provided any information on the source of those items. The exporting state is not provided. And so this is for the major conventional weapons. Another state party has taken the option of providing information on exports of manpads, indicating the final importing states, and even providing a description of the items, but has classified the number of items being exported. Now, I'm hopeful that the country can explain, but I can do my best, having worked with this country over many years, and we'll note that this is a consistent approach that this state party uses, not just for the Arms Trade Treaty, but also for its reporting under the UN Register of Conventional Arms. So there's consistency in this approach, and my interactions and my understanding is that the numbers are classified for national security considerations on the part of the importing state. Now, from my research over the past couple of years, these are the two main ways in which we have information. The minimum information is not being provided with regard to transfers of major conventional weapons. As Karina mentioned, it tends to be with regard to small arms and light weapons that we see levels of aggregation. And just as one example here, this state party uses the ATT reporting form for providing data and information on exports and imports of major conventional weapons, but provides a separate annex in which it provides aggregated data for small arms light weapons permits granted, in other words, authorizations, and the number of items classified as small arms and light weapons by importing state. It's not using the subcategories, and it also provides an aggregated total value for these small arms light weapons exports. Other states take the approach of just using the category of small arms and/or small arms light weapons and providing information, as discussed earlier, with regard to actual or authorized. In this case, they're giving the value broken down by each importing country, but they're not providing, in this particular case, the subcategories that are used in the reporting form. And we see this in a number of cases with regard to aggregated data on actual exports of small arms light weapons. As Karina mentioned, there's a couple of cases that do this. We also see aggregated totals for each subcategory for small arms light weapons exports and imports. And here's one example I hope you can see. So here we have the number of exports broken down by the subcategories of revolvers and self-loading pistols, rifles and carbines and so on. But we're not seeing to whom these items are being exported. It's just stated multiple states, as highlighted here. As mentioned before, is this useful? At least you're getting some of the information, but not all of the information is being provided. In another case, we have the aggregated totals, and then a list of the importing countries are indicated, but you don't know how many of these particular revolvers and pistols, for example, are coming from Panama, or from the Czech Republic, or from the US. But at least you have the information about who the exporting states are. In this particular case, I wanted to share with you, we have the aggregation by subcategories, again, not indicating the state of export, but we do have additional extra information here about accessories and silencers. And I think there was a comment earlier about providing ammunition, and some of the countries that I focus on in this particular presentation do actually provide information about ammunition, even though they might not be providing full information with regard to their small arms light weapons imports or exports. This is a similar example to what we saw with the issue of missiles and missile launchers, but here with regards to light weapons being aggregated, not providing the number, but providing a description of the items at hand and the importing states. What I thought might be useful or interesting because of the issue of consistency is I see in several reports, and I'm sure that my colleagues in Control Arms do too, a mixed approach. On this particular slide, if you have tremendous eyesight, you can hopefully see that right at the top, there's the category of others for small arms. Highlighted in red, you can see that it's talking about an authorization of 17 other small arms. And the final importing state is identified as LT or LV, so Lithuania or Latvia. But when it comes to the category of others for light weapons, we have a discussion on actual exports in this particular case, 10 items. The final importing state is Latvia. Additional information on the state of origin being the UK, and it's indicated that it's 81mm mortars and the type. So just to show you, there's a mixed approach that we're seeing, and sometimes you'll get different information in the same report, where there might be information on authorizations, and there might also be information on exports. Also on actual transfers. And again, another example where we have in one particular case detailed information, and then alongside it, aggregated information for subcategories and identifying that it's being imported from multiple states. I think I'll have this as one of the final examples, which I think is useful, is to show that here we have, again, a mixture of aggregated information for revolvers and self-loading pistols for 185, imported, and a number of countries from which they've been imported. But when it comes to items for military procurement, additional information is being provided with regard to the description of the item and also the source of supply. So from my perspective, I see, with regard to small arms and light weapons imports and exports, you're seeing sometimes information is being made more transparent, or more information when it comes to items that are clearly being imported for use by armed forces. And I think that some of the situations that we see with regard to the categories, especially of revolvers, pistols, rifles, and carbines is we're probably seeing in there authorizations for civilian use. And so this is one of the ways in which it could be beneficial or helpful for some states to be sharing information in this regard with regard to their practices on how this is being undertaken. So in the interest of time, I'll try and cut as short as I can. And so my final remarks, as Karina put it, it's no surprise that the aggregation of data in ATT annual reports is primarily related to imports and exports of small arms and light weapons. I've just tried to give you some examples concretely of the different methods of aggregation used. For example, some states parties are not using the subcategories for reporting small arms and light weapons imports and exports, but aggregating as one whole category. And then in other cases, we're seeing aggregated units or the value for a category or subcategory, but not providing a breakdown or identifying very clearly the importing and exporting states. Some cases, I believe this is relating to taking into account security considerations, and I think also with regards to different types of end users. My hope was that this presentation could help to prompt some states parties in the room today or online to provide some understanding or explanation as to why these different approaches are being taken. And I'm doing this not in the sense of naming and shaming, but just to encourage that there are different ways in which states parties can use the reporting form and their national approaches to fulfill their annual report approaches. I think Karina has explained what we would expect, but I think for some states that are starting off with regard to perhaps the first time they're putting together an annual report, I'm hoping that this gave you a taste of how you could, at a minimum, fulfill these obligations within the treaty and then work towards strengthening or improving them. With that, thank you so much, and I hope that I've not taken up too much time. I hope if anyone wants to have a deeper dive into the issue of aggregation, I'm here, very happy to discuss further, but I'm sure that you've all had enough, so back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul, for your interesting and concise presentation on the states parties aggregation practices. I would now like to open the floor to states parties or other delegation who would like to intervene on this point. I recognize the state of Argentina.
Muchas gracias a las copresidentas del grupo. Agradecemos también a UNIDIR por su completa y comprensiva presentación sobre datos agregados en informes anuales de ATT. Creemos que ello ayudará a mejorar las prácticas nacionales. La Argentina considera a la transparencia y la presentación de informes un pilar del tratado. Consecuentemente, ha cumplido con sus informes inicial y los informes anuales, poniendo esa información a disposición de manera pública y haciéndolo de manera desagregada. Es motivo de preocupación, y compartimos los comentarios realizados, sobre el número decreciente de presentaciones, e instamos a los países que aún no lo han hecho a que publiquen sus informes con la certeza de que la práctica constante y reiterada conduce a mejores resultados año a año. Como dijéramos en la pasada reunión preparatoria, estamos listos para seguir trabajando en perfeccionar la estructura de los informes, inclusive con la posible inclusión de una categoría relativa a impacto de género. A tal fin, y debido a que no es posible informar si no se cuenta con capacidades y datos para ello, queremos recordar que estamos trabajando para presentar una encuesta que permita identificar distintas categorías en materia de impacto de género. Esperamos que esto permita, en un futuro, considerar la inclusión de una nueva categoría sobre género y violencia basada en el género en los informes inicial y anual. Muchas gracias.
Thank you to the distinguished delegate of Argentina for that very constructive input. I now recognize Control Arms.
Thank you, co-chairs. The ATT Monitor would like to commend the working group co-chairs and the ATT Secretariat for continuing to provide resources and guidance on reporting during this intersessional period prior to CSP8. We welcome the presentation delivered by UNIDIR and would like to take this opportunity to provide our own comments on the issue of data aggregation. Transparency in arms transfers is a central component of the ATT and fundamental to achieving its goals and objectives. We would like to draw attention to our most recent paper titled Transparency and Reporting in the Global Arms Trade, Identifying Gaps in Reported Arms Transfers and Assessing States' Commitments to Transparency, where we analyze annual reporting practices and identify gaps in reported transfers in the context of the humanitarian crises in Yemen and Myanmar. One of the gaps identified in the paper, and where we would like to focus our intervention today, is the issue of data aggregation in annual reports and the limited number of states parties that share fully disaggregated data. Now, as has been outlined earlier, this means annual reporting that clearly and comprehensively breaks down individual weapon transfers by, firstly, the number of units, secondly, the final importing or exporting state, thirdly, the weapon subcategory, and finally, that specifies whether all transfers are authorized or actual. This ensures that there is a clear record of how many and what kinds of weapons were transferred to or from a given country. In 2020, 27 states parties submitted fully disaggregated information for all the transfers they reported, representing around 2/3 of the states that submitted publicly available reports. However, this figure represents just 29% of all states obliged to submit annual reports. More broadly, only 16 states parties have consistently provided fully disaggregated information for all their reported transfers between 2015 and 2020. Our analysis also shows that small arms are the most frequently aggregated category of weapons, responsible for 57% of all aggregated transfers since 2015. ATT Monitor research has also identified 3 specific subcategories of small arms which are most prone to aggregation, either by importing or exporting state, number of units, or authorized and or actual. These subcategories are revolvers and self-loading pistols, rifles and carbines, and others in small arms. From the trends that we've discussed today, it's clear that the increase in private reporting, the declining rates of compliance with ATT reporting obligations, and the enduring issue of data aggregation in annual reports are reducing the share of reports submitted each year that contribute positively to the transparency aims and objectives of the treaty. It is, however, also clear that some states parties have shown a clear and consistent commitment to meaningfully transparent and disaggregated reporting, but more can be done. We encourage the working group to explore ways in which those state parties that stand out by the quality of their reporting can share their good practices with others to help further transparency in the global arms trade. The ATT Monitor also stands ready to assist states parties in strengthening their reporting practices by providing practical advice and support throughout the reporting period. I thank you, co-chairs.
Thank you to the representative of Control Arms. I now give the floor to Sweden and Belgium. Sweden?
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. It's the first intervention of my delegation during this week's ATT meetings. So let me start by thanking the chairs of each working group, as well as the facilitators for the thorough preparations of this week's meetings. I'd also like to thank the German presidency for all its efforts during the CSP8 preparatory process. And of course, also thank the Secretariat for its steadfast support to the states parties. Let me also take this opportunity to warmly welcome the Philippines as the 111th state party to the ATT. Moving on to the current session on transparency and reporting, I thank the presenters from Stimson Center, Control Arms, and UNIDIR for many valuable insights. And I'd like to pick up on the encouragement from Mr. Paul Holtom to state parties to offer some additional information on the topic. Reporting on arms exports and imports represents one of the central obligations of the ATT. In the view of my delegation, the annual report is an effective means to increase transparency and confidence building among states parties. For this reason, Sweden has always made its annual report publicly available, and we encourage others to do so as well. Sweden reports annually on actual exports and imports divided by the 7 UN registry categories. In line with Article 13.3, of the treaty, and in accordance with the National Public Access to Information and Secrecy Act, some commercially sensitive and/or national security-related data is usually withheld with respect to confidentiality. So your assumption was quite right, Paul. For instance, we do not report on the number of items imported or exported for certain categories. However, we always provide information on the exporting or final importing state, as well as description of the items transferred. Additionally, we include an annex in the report on a voluntary basis in order to make the report more detailed. So the annex includes information on the aggregated value of exports divided by state and category as defined in the EU Common Military List. We also include 3 additional categories as defined in our national legislation. This practice allows us to increase the level of transparency in our ATT report without compromising our commercial or national security interests. Further information about Swedish exports of military equipment, as well as dual-use goods, is annually provided by the Swedish government in a report to the Swedish Parliament. This report also includes detailed information on our national export control policy, legislation, and also historical developments. The report is translated into English and subsequently made publicly every year, available on the government's website. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair.
Thank you to the distinguished delegate from Sweden for your great explanation of your national practices and for highlighting also the opportunity to provide voluntary information in the annual report. The last speaker on the list, and after that I'm going to close the floor for time considerations, is Belgium. Belgium, you have the floor.
Thank you, Sabina. I just wanted to quickly intervene to clarify that the reasons I mentioned earlier after Karina's presentation about why Belgium aggregates some data on small arms and light weapons, obviously they apply to one of the examples that was given by Paul. Now, next to aggregation, I think our reports have also shown some inconsistencies in the method chosen, and that is definitely something that we will try to work on in the future. Thank you.
And thank you to the representative from Belgium. It seems like I overlooked the flag up from Montenegro, so I give you the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. The delegation of Montenegro takes this opportunity to foremost express our gratitude and commend the working group's effort and work in previous period in bringing to attention different important perspectives on transparency and reporting, which we truly believe represent ATT's essential elements. Montenegro aligns with the EU statements delivered today and during previous meetings of working groups. On top of that, as Montenegro's delegation takes the floor for the first time of this cycle of working groups meetings, we want to emphasize that our country remains strongly committed to implementing the ATT fully and responsibly. To that aim, Montenegro pushes forward efforts to submit our national reports on treaties implementation regularly and timely, and we encourage all states to do so. Montenegro strives to continuously improve the arms trade practices in accordance with the highest international standards, aiming to ensure the compliance with the ATT and other regional and international obligations. Hence, among others, we are carrying out efforts to bolster the stockpile security and management segment. Being brief, Montenegro is a credible partner, remains committed to all joint efforts crafted to ensure the full and effective implementation of the ATT, as well as to develop novel policies and carry out higher standards in regulating the conventional arms trade and curbing the illicit trafficking. Thank you, Madam Chair. We hope we've been briefed.
Thank you to the distinguished delegate from Montenegro. We would not have wanted to miss that, so thank you for your contribution. Many thanks to Paul for your interesting presentation, and to all participants who took the floor under this agenda item. In addition to today's presentation, we would like to point to the FAQ-style guidance document, which contains a number of Q&As regarding aggregation for your guidance. Before closing this agenda item, we would like to remind participants that there is an open invitation to participants. Oh, I'm doing a terrible job today at hosting. Mauritania, please, the floor is yours.
Je vous remercie encore une fois. Je crois que le rapport et le guide d'orientation, les deux font à peu près, ou certainement d'ailleurs, la moelle épinière du traité. Et par conséquent, j'ai une suggestion dans ce cadre. Je crois qu'il serait judicieux de programmer des séances d'instruction, d'explication au profit des participants pour donner des explications sur le guide d'orientation et les techniques et expliquer les techniques d'élaboration des rapports. Je vous remercie.
Thank you to the distinguished delegate from Mauritania for that excellent suggestion. So I'll go back to where I left off. Before closing this agenda item, we would like to remind participants that there is an open invitation to participants in the working group raised in our introductory paper in February to raise any substantive issues on reporting and transparency to be discussed in the working group. Issues can be raised in writing via email to the co-chairs and the ATT at Secretariat or via the information exchange platform. With this, we conclude the consideration of agenda item 3 and move on to agenda item 4 on the organizational means for information exchange. Under this agenda item, participants are invited to propose and discuss structured mechanism, processes, or formats facilitating the information exchanges that are required or encouraged by the treaty, both on the policy level as well as on an operational level. In the introductory paper to the meeting in February, as well as in the meeting itself, the co-chairs invited written proposals via email to the co-chairs and the ATT Secretariat, or via the information exchange platform, as well as oral proposals during today's meeting. We have to inform you that to date we have not received written proposals. The invitation to put forward proposals remains open, either by taking the floor today or in writing afterwards. Secondly, the co-chairs would like to take the opportunity to encourage states parties and signatory states to register online for access to this restricted area of the ATT website and for access to the IT platform. Also, the co-chairs recall that the exchanges via the information exchange portal are one of the predefined tiers of the three-tier approach to sharing information on diversion that was endorsed by the states parties at CSP8, next to the discussions on the working group on effective treaty implementation and the diversion information exchange forum adopted by the CSP6. Finally, the co-chairs would like to invite Mr. Tom Nice, chair of the Diversion Information Exchange Forum, to provide an update on the organization of the first meeting of the forum as part of the three-tier approach to sharing information on diversion. So without further ado, over to you, Tom.
Thank you, Sabina. I'll try to be a bit brief. Well, it's clear by now that we are not having a meeting of the forum this week. We considered doing that, but we thought that the broad in-person participation that we all want to have in the forum was not yet feasible at this meeting, and definitely not of experts that would be attending, which the terms of reference strongly encourage. And also there was not enough time between the decision on the format of the meetings and the possible date on the meeting. But it is obviously then the intention during the week of the conference itself that we will have a DIV meeting. And if you allow me, in view of that, I just want to turn two states parties and signatory states on that, because already this week, but also last year, we've heard very positive words about the DIV being expressed, about its importance and what it can contribute to preventing diversion. But it's clear, obviously, that these words will only have meaning if, starting from August, all states, parties and signatories will use the DIV for the purpose of its establishment. And that purpose will not be making statements about its importance or explaining the policy measures that states have put in place to prevent diversion in general, because for that we have an excellent sub-working group of the implementation working group. Now, the purpose of the DIF is states presenting concrete cases of detected or suspected diversion and sharing concrete operational information. It's that kind of information that can help other states and signatories in their day-to-day practice and prevent similar cases. Now, with that in mind, for this year, this is my first call to states, parties, and signatories to contact myself or the Secretariat if you are considering to use the inaugural DIF meeting to do exactly that, so share concrete cases or concrete information. Obviously, further calls will follow of myself, of the Secretariat, and of the CSP President, but I want to start early so that we can make the first meeting a milestone and the norm for further meetings to come. And in that same respect, I also call on non-state actors that are involved in investigating, establishing, identifying, and/or addressing cases of diversion with states to encourage them to using the DIF and getting in touch with us as soon as possible. Obviously, I myself am ready to answer any questions and take away concerns that states might have. As I'm aware, we are on a very new path with the DIF. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom, for that update. With that, I would like to open the floor to a participant wishing to intervene under this agenda item. I would ask you to be brief because we are on borrowed time with the grace of the interpreters. I don't see any delegations wishing to take the floor. So with that, I close our discussion on this agenda point and hand over to my co-chair.
Muchas gracias, Sabine. Como ustedes saben, en este punto de agendas se invita a los estados partes para señalar cualquier problema o inconveniente que experimenten con la plataforma de intercambio de información o el uso de la herramienta de presentación de informes en línea y proporcionar sugerencias y comentarios para mejorar su funcionalidad. Las copresidentas notan que el uso de la plataforma informática sigue siendo muy modesto y alientan a los estados partes a aprovechar estas herramientas a su disposición. Ahora me gustaría ceder la palabra a los participantes que quieran comentar sobre este tema. No veo en sala. Bueno. Veo una solicitud de Sudáfrica. Sudáfrica, por favor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the efficient manner in which the co-chairs are guiding our discussions. I'll try to be brief in the interests of time. It's not about any difficulties with the IT platform or so that we encounter. It's about the transparency and availability of some of the information. Now, each state party has the sovereign right to request that its information be withheld. I did check with Sarah, who kindly informed me about my question about the national points of contact and why they are restricted or on the restricted part of the database. Apparently, according to the information she gave me, that goes back to CSP8, in which it was stated that this should be made available, the information on the national points of contact on the restricted section of the ATT website as a first step to facilitate information exchange. I think we've gone beyond the first step at this stage, and there's no reason why I believe this information needs to be restricted. If one looks at the actual the template states that certain forms may be withheld. I think we should revisit this idea, not in terms of limiting the actual or the right of a state party to limit the availability of the forms, but simply the point of contact. I take, for instance, if an NGO or international organization wishes to organize a seminar or a workshop and wishes to invite a specific or particular state party, they should have access to that information on who the points of contact are for these particular meetings. I think Ambassador Sanchez of Spain made a very good proposal, had a very good idea on a group of friends on reporting, for instance. And this might be an avenue for taking this issue further in order to see if we can find a way of amending that language in the template in order to say that as a rule, as a general rule, the national point of contact information should be made publicly available, and that states parties may withhold any other information. I thank you, Madam Co-Chairs, again for the excellent manner in which you're guiding our work.
Muchísimas gracias a la delegación de Sudáfrica y tomamos nota de esta valiosa propuesta que de hecho también coadyuva los esfuerzos de mayor transparencia e intercambio de información. Lo tomaremos en cuenta entonces para la siguiente revisión que haremos para la octava conferencia de Estados partes, y dado por la limitación de tiempo quizás pasamos directamente al último punto de la agenda. No obstante, si hay algún estado que tiene alguna reacción en cuanto a la propuesta de Sudáfrica, les agradecería que nos lo hicieran saber por escrito, sobre todo si tienen algún inconveniente, pero nos parece que sería algo muy positivo para nuestros trabajos. Con esto le paso las riendas a mi copresidenta Sabine para que proceda con el último punto de la agenda y concluir esta reunión.
Thank you, Grisel. And the last point on the agenda is the working group mandate for the period between CSP8 and CSP9. In preparation of today's meeting, you received a draft of the proposed mandate prepared by the co-chairs for the working group for the CSP9 cycle, so for the period between September 2022 until August 2023. It's contained in Annex B of the draft annotated agenda. The draft annotated mandate has 4 standing agenda items: the state of play of compliance with reporting obligation and challenges concerning reporting; 2, the substantive issues concerning reporting under Article 13 of the ATT; 3, transparency and information exchange; and 4, the working group mandate for the next cycle. Under each of these 4 standing items, there are a number of topics listed in the draft mandate that can be covered. This list is supposed to be illustrative and not prescriptive or exhaustive. Compared to the current mandate of the CSP8 cycle, you will find that the draft mandate for the CSP9 cycle contains considerably fewer recurrent and specific tasks that the working party is tasked to deal with as a minimum during the upcoming cycle. The idea behind this change is to allow the work in the working group to be more flexible and responsive to upcoming challenges and developments, and to input from the members of the working group. That does not mean that none of the current recurring and specific tasks will not come back on the working plan. The proposed mandate is flexible and can accommodate all the tasks under the agenda items proposed. It is, however, no longer mandatory to deal with them all. So far, our thinking and considerations when preparing the proposed mandate. However, of course, we are here as facilitators to the working group, and as such are here to serve you, the participants of the working group. So we would very much so like to welcome your thoughts on the mandate for the upcoming cycle. And I hereby open the floor to participants who wish to share their view on the draft mandate and topics that you would like to see covered in the next cycle. Is there anyone who would like to take the floor? There is no one online, and I don't see anybody in the room either. So in that case, I will move on. I would like to remind you that you are invited to share your comments with us in writing on the draft mandate, in writing via an email to us or the ATT secretary or via the information exchange platform. We will consider all proposed changes and put forward a new version of the mandate for adoption at the CSP8 in accordance with the terms of reference and Rule 42.2 of the ATT Rules of Procedures. That brings us to any other business. There were no other agenda items put forward, so that means that we can go to close the meeting. I would first like to hand over to the ATT Secretary yet for final announcements.
Thank you so much. I will be very brief. Just to let you know that there are 2 side events taking place this afternoon. The first is titled Diversion and the ATT, Measures for Responding to Weapon and Ammunition Diversion. This is organised by UNIDIR, Stimson and Conflict Armament Research and will be held in virtual format from 4:30 to 6 p.m. The second is titled At Whose Risk? Understanding States Parties, Implementation of Arms Trade Treaty, Gender-Based Violence Provisions. This event is organised by the Small Arms Survey in Switzerland and will take place in virtual format from 4:30 to 5:45. I also want to alert you to the fact that there is another side event taking place tomorrow morning before the meetings. It's titled Transit and the Transfer of Weapons by Sea, Land and Air to Countries of Conflict. Africa is an example. And it's being organised by the Global Coalition for Limitation of Armaments and the Commission Indépendante de Droits de l'Homme en Afrique du Nord, sorry for my French pronunciation, CIDH, I probably should have relied on the acronym. This will be held in virtual format from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. tomorrow morning. So just going back, the links for the side events are online on the ATT webpage, and the link to the ATT webpage is on the bottom of this title. The last thing to mention is to, of course, please remind you to send your statements for tomorrow's session, the last day of the meetings, to us in advance so we can share them with the very hardworking interpreters who do a great job to keep up with you, and it's aided if they have copies of your statements in advance. And with that, I thank you very much.
The meeting is closed.
Do you want to bang the gavel? Who's got the gavel?